The night was incredibly moonlit. Shadows and moths peeked around. The rustle of their wings soothed with a monotonous flutter. The words that flowed in whispers sometimes encouraged, then called to lose common sense. The aroma of flowers wafted from everywhere and intoxicated with a thin plume of nectar. Footsteps were heard. The girl was frightened and alert. She began to listen. It must have been the Emperor, a monster to look for. But her companion did not stop, reassured her and persuaded her not to move. The enveloping silence prolonged the sweet moment of closeness, although it was scary. But I didn't want to break it. These dizzying kisses knocked the floor out from under their feet, and the girl surrendered to her feelings despite her caution. However, she did not hear. There was really someone behind the curtain, and the snapping of her fingers almost made her faint. Words poured out from behind the curtain, penetrating like poison into the ears, into the soul, and into the heart itself. The voice reported that she was only a breeding mare, which was raised for the comfort of the emperors. It was painful for the girl to hear words of insult again and again, which became more and more perfect each time. That it is needed only to prolong the imperial family. Behind the screen was the emperor. The purpose of the girl to share his bed, and because of the disfigured half of the face, he drove her away and from that time mocked and mocked her appearance. He gave her into the hands of his twin brother, who was famous for his cruelty. He was nicknamed the Hound of War for his tenacity in battle, terrorizing all enemies. The frightened girl whispered that they must be doomed. She knew the extent of the emperor's cruelty and could not hope for anything else. Tears poured down the disfigured face like May rain, warm and abundant. But her chosen one whispered that this is why they have to survive and must do it together. Comforted and instructed, he said that she should beg the emperor to spare her life. Whispered what exactly she should say. The emperor was interested in the fact that they had the audacity to whisper in front of him. Surprised, he approached the screen, and with hatred, as if a snake, asked what they were whispering about. And then the concubine raised her face, covered with tears, and desperately asked for mercy. She begged the emperor to grant her life. There was no hope, but she begged. The country of Teso. Small. There is a legend that in ancient times a virgin who came down from heaven fell in love with a mortal. Her beauty was so incredible that no writer could describe her, and no artist could transfer this image to canvas. The bath shone like the sun and smelled of flowers. This union was full of happiness and joy. Having settled on the land, children were born to them, beautiful as a mother. This people began to be called Yule. That unearthly beauty became rather a curse. Everyone envied such perfection, and they became the target of these envious people, and the people decreased in number every year. Yule girls, as the most beautiful in the universe, began to be taken as concubines to the imperial palace, to fulfill all the emperor's wishes and prolong his family. And now the time has come for the last of the Yule family, called by the emperor to wait and fulfill all his wishes. He had many concubines, spoiled by wealth. He did not deny himself anything. Today he was in high spirits. He was expecting the most beautiful creature. When the eunuch entered and announced that the girl from Yule had arrived, the emperor quickly got up and sent his passion to his room. Oh, how disappointed she was. The eunuch said with fear that there was a nuance with the new concubine, but his majesty did not pay attention to it and ordered to bring her. His last mistress had not yet had time to leave. She was in no hurry. Her hatred for her new concubine grew by the second, and she gathered slowly, hoping to see the hateful creature. The last of Yule silently entered the room, lowering her head. She barely audibly said that she had arrived by imperial order and that her name was Sun. The silence that reigned in the palace was such that you could hear the squeal of a mosquito from outside. Loud, unrestrained cursing followed. The emperor was furious. The last of the Yule family, who were always impeccably beautiful, was unbearably ugly. One half of the face is divinely beautiful, the other is mercilessly distorted. The eunuch prostrated himself in front of the ruler with pleas not to execute him, and reported that when the girl's mother heard about the order to deliver her, she could not control her rage and disfigured her face. Here the girl fell on her knees and begged to have mercy on her mother, as she had long since lost her sense of reason, and did not understand what she was doing. The emperor was so disappointed and angered by the event that he began to laugh, and with each breath he laughed louder and louder. But it was not laughter from fun. Glory! His concubine had never seen so much insidiousness in him as she now heard in his belly laugh. Both the eunuch and Sun did not get up, because a small movement that would stop the emperor's anger could cost them their lives. They lay prostrate, not even breathing. Finally, his rage rose to the surface. He shouted so that the walls shook. "I ordered to kill this scumbag and bring another one from Yule's family." He ordered to bring everyone from this family, so that he would tear off the limbs of everyone, including her mother. He will enjoy the warmth of the blood of these pagans. The eunuch barely dared to raise his head and respectfully announced that this girl was the last of her kind. As soon as this girl was taken away, the whole nation committed suicide. The terrible news was unexpected even for Sun, the mother. Pain pierced her chest like a dagger. Sun looked at the eunuch and asked if her mother was really dead. But he, in a whisper, warned her not to raise her voice in the presence of the emperor. Meanwhile, the emperor silently and authoritatively approached the bed on which his mistress was still sitting. And slowly he took out the sword from the scabbard. As the metal sang its cold song as it made its way to the light, the emperor said that lately everyone was daring to disobey his orders. The voice sounded even. In the moonlight, the blade flashed and hissed. In a fraction of a second, the sound died down, and the metallic smell of blood wafted through the palace room. Blood streamed down the thin neck of the concubine. He coldly said that he should have listened to the order. He was told to go to his place. The silence was broken only by the sound of trickling drops of blood, which quickly filled the puddle near the bed. Leaving the room, the emperor ordered the chief eunuch to look for survivors, and until then he allowed this monster to live. With this order, he left the room. Such a tragic event started the story of the last of the Yule family, once the most beautiful creatures that were subjected to the pleasures of emperors. The morning was incredibly sunny and surprisingly warm. The restless breeze tickled the curly leaves of the trees, and the rays of the sun jumped from drop to drop of morning dew. Concubine Sun consulted on the beds. On such sunny days the grass grew surprisingly fast, and she was so immersed in her thoughts and work that she did not hear her being called. Didn't want to. And only when she heard her name, and her friends called her Solka, did she turn around. She smiled and said that this was exactly what she was waiting for, because she asked not to be called Miss or Mrs. 10 years have passed since that terrible event. For 10 years, Songseola, the last of Yule, lives at the palace as a concubine. Eun-young was her babysitter all this time, and all the time she reminded that after all, Solka was her maiden and concubine of the emperor, although settled in a dilapidated part of the palace far away. The nanny looked at the young lady's hair and asked her to sit down to fix it, and she would pull out the rest of the weeds herself, and Solka offered to share this work. While they were fixing their hair, there was girl talk. Time passed so quickly that Solka has already become an adult, and it seems like only yesterday that she was brought as a small, frightened girl. It's been almost 10 years. Just a little more, and Song will be allowed to leave these walls, and she will take Eunjong with her. This opportunity pleased them both because they had suffered enough here. The old scar still hurt, but now it reminded me of myself. And Solka asked the nanny. Rather, she shared the opinion that probably her mother knew that this terrible burn would allow her to survive, but she hastened to console her that there was only a little left. Next spring she would finally be free. The long-awaited will open its arms for the suffering girl. The girl threw herself into the nanny's arms and said everything that heard about the constant attacks of the emperor and the contempt of the courtiers, how she was already waiting for this release. She promised to endure this period of time as steadily as she could. She will pray that nothing happens when the emperor invites her to his bedroom again. After all, only if she remains chaste will she be able to leave this place forever and take Eunjong with her. To go so far that even the name of this country is not heard there. The girls heard the commotion, and soon the flags were flying. Sun said that it must be Prince Yeonwoo who has returned, who was nicknamed the Demon. Here, Eunjong hissed to keep quiet. Every time the prince comes, the palace is permeated with the air of death. The door opened with such speed that it almost flew off its hinges. A eunuch burst in. The news that the emperor was calling her to him could not cheer her up. The eunuch rushed to this distant corner of the palace so much that he choked and could not say anything else. Solka was both surprised and frightened and did not immediately believe it. He must have confused something. Probably he should have called another concubine. But I understood that it was true. When the emperor called, there was no need to think. The slightest crumb of dissatisfaction ignited a fire of rage in him. So Solka climbed numerous stairs in a second. At the meeting, she tried not to raise her eyes and instantly fell on her knees with praises of his greatest majesty. the Lord of all lords, and so on. But he stopped her. As usual during this decade, he summoned her to mock and laugh at her flaw along with many other concubines. Now he was looking down on her. Then he turned to the other concubine, because he promised that she would lose her appetite from the sight of Solka, and laughing loudly, added that she would now become slimmer. The concubine supported her lord and said that now she will not sleep well. She will have nightmares if she sees the face of this monster again. Of course, everyone was delighted, laughing and having fun. Solka tried not to look down. She pretended that these jokes really bothered her, and that it was unbearably painful to listen to. She quietly praised the master's wisdom, and he continued to practice his humorist skills. He said that she always amuses him because, on the one hand, she is a beauty. On the other, an incredible monster. Even in the most fantastic dream, such a thing would not have occurred. Here the emperor thought more than one night he tried to drag the last of the Yule family into his bed, because losing a nation of beauties is a great tragedy. But every time he tried to cover her face, this distorted half showed itself, and all the thirst to master her softened. The concubines burst into laughter. Some asked the owner to drive her away, pretending that she stinks. But in reality, they were showing off in front of the emperor to present themselves in another world as if they were better. Sun said that she was in a hurry to obey his will, so she didn't have time to get herself in the right shape. There was silence. The emperor looked carefully, narrowing his eyes. He said out loud that she was determined to leave the palace in the near future. It sounded both as a statement and as a question. So Sun, bending even lower, quietly said that he was right. And she froze, not daring to move and somehow provoke the emperor's anger. She had so little left. But the emperor had already come up with his plan. If he can't breathe new life into her, maybe someone else will. Is he right? At this time, all dreams of a quick release from this hell began to dissolve in the water and disappear like a soap bubble. Is this the end? My eyes darkened. Sun gathered her last strength and uttered words of gratitude, and wants to ask the emperor to allow her to devote herself to the service of God Buddha. The emperor still failed. He shouted that he would never let her out of his sight as she amused him greatly with her appearance, and he did not intend to remain without amusement. He whispered poisonously that she brought him more joy than the beloved of the concubines who were in his bed. He added that he is sure that she wants to taste the pleasure that only a man can give. This again sounded like both a statement and a question. Sun began to beg that she only wanted to enter the monastery, wants to devote himself to Buddha, begged and begged the emperor to give her this opportunity. The scene was interrupted by a eunuch who announced that Prince Yanwu had arrived. Only a eunuch could enter the feast of the holy chambers of concubines, and his message changed the course of the emperor's thoughts. He pushed Solka in his heart and, displeased, told her to get out. Always untimely, this eunuch brings some news. She did not have to repeat it twice. She quickly got up and silently left the palace. And just as she stepped outside the door, when the emperor ordered to stop, he changed his mind. She froze in anticipation. In the last 10 minutes, the emperor's mood changed several times, and her will, which she longed for so long, then moved away forever, then came closer. But the emperor's plan had no equal in treachery. He ordered to look at the approaching figure. This is his twin brother. Fear enveloped the girl, her breath caught. He is the only person who has the right to enter the harem, and he is the only person who breathes. After all, the rumors that the father got confused before his death and gave the throne to him and not to his brother are rumors. And with those who spread these rumors, with each one, the emperor dealt with them. They all got what they deserved, down to one. He hissed it in Sun's ear like a snake, an asp from the dungeon. He told me exactly how. He tore out their tongues and tore off the skin from their trembling bodies partially, and lined up those whose life was dying and let them walk around the market square until their last breath. He depicted these events with such pleasure that the last hope for salvation melted away. Complete despair filled the mind of the unfortunate beauty from the Yule family. The emperor was delighted with himself. Sun's body treacherously betrayed her fear, began to tremble, although she tried not to show it. He bent down and breathed in Solka's scent. He noticed that the concubines lied about her smell, because her smell was incredibly pleasant, unlike her face. When the emperor's brother approached, he pushed Solka, ordering him to go. The girl did not know whether to be happy about this or to be afraid. Perhaps the dream of liberation has not disappeared after all. The prince, comparing himself to her, gave way. suggested that the lady should go first. The look on his face and his surprise at looking at her scars, confused them both. Solka did not understand whether he, like the emperor, was mocking or sincere. The girl covered her face with her hand and apologized. When she passed the prince, she heard his words that the pain must have been unbearable. And again the intonation seemed sincere and mocking. The last words she heard while leaving the palace were that she was very brave. Solka rushed out of the palace, exhaling all the tension. She remained chaste again, just a miracle. As she walked, she remembered how the concubine spat poison at her, said that she smelled, that they were ashamed, that this monster was also a concubine, and that the emperor would make a fool of her. But everything is behind me, at least today. I thought about the prince. I wanted to believe that he was sincere and the words that flew out of his mouth were not a joke. But he is a twin brother. If he is sincere, then he is the complete opposite of the emperor. Evil, vile, with an ugly soul. Is this possible? These thoughts circled until Sun reached her room. Closing the door behind her, she breathed a sigh of relief. A frightened nanny jumped out of the room, ran up, began to ask her if the worst thing had happened. At first, frowning and pretending that everything was bad, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. So confused was Eunjung's look. She said that everything is fine. When the nanny calmed down, Seolha said that she had seen Prince Yeonhwa. He and the emperor are like one person, but something in him seemed different. It is not clear why, it just seemed. He called her brave. It sounded as if he had known her for a long time and knew how hard it was for her to survive here, to live. For some reason, Sun thought about her burn, ran her hand over the marks. The rough bumps of the scars felt under his fingers. She asked the nanny if her scar had healed. Eunjung said that it still takes time. After this conversation, they were caught dumb. He never knocked because he did not hear whether they were allowed, so he opened the door slightly and looked for an answer. Seeing him, the girls laughed and he realized that he could come in. Of course, he saw what was happening in the palace and decided to comfort Sun. He brought cookies. They sat down to drink tea with cookies that Hoyen had brought. Sun allowed to come whenever he wanted, and there was no need to bring anything so that he wouldn't have any trouble. Eunjung wondered how her missus understood what this mute boy was saying, when she really understood him simply by emotions. It turns out that the cookies are from the concubine's table. A second later, the door opened wide, and without any invitation or permission, the concubine burst in with her eunuchs, shouting that the mute had stolen the emperor's gifts. Hoyen prostrated himself before his concubine and made only the sounds that Mother Nature had given him. Seeing the cookies on the table where everyone was just sitting, she exclaimed that if Sun wanted them so much, she could come and ask for them. Solka was not embarrassed and reminded concubine Shin that it was now in her possession and that she should not forget it. But she continued to shout that the mute stole her food and jewelry, and that she followed him. It was he who brought her to these chambers, and the cookies on the table stolen from her are proof of her rightness. Solka saw that there was no point in talking to Shin. She was worthy of her master, and she had to intercede for the unfortunate man, because he was always kind to her and did not deserve punishment. The concubine ordered the eunuchs to take away Hoyen. Oh, and she was proud of herself at that moment. The eunuchs grabbed the young man, twisted his hands. It was obvious that he was in pain, but everyone was indifferent. Shin immediately acted as a judge and passed the sentence. His hands will be cut off and he will be thrown out of the palace, so he will die somewhere in a ditch. The young man was lip-reading this terrible punishment. Solka rushed to save the boy. Even if all this is true, he is only a dumb boy. The mutilation will really lead to his death. She tried to reach Shin's heart. Realizing that it is useless to ask something from a heartless woman, Sun offered to punish her and let the boy go. Such words satisfied the hearing of the concubine very much. She did not forget to remind about that night. I asked again, "Did you like it?" Of course it was by order of His Majesty. That night the emperor made love to Shin, and Sola sat next to him and heard everything. That was the emperor's word. Shin haughtily raised her head and arrogantly asked how she lives with such shame. Why watch them make love? In the tone of the owner, the snake hissed that on the spot Sun would have killed herself from such shame. Solka agreed. Of course she is guilty, and Shin is right in everything, because this is exactly what the superior concubine wanted to hear now. That is why she asks to let the young man go. How sweet it was for Shin to hear these words. She changed her anger to mercy. and just out of respect for her friend concubine, changed the punishment to 50 strokes of the cane. The boy exclaimed. Sun, hearing about such mercy, fell to her knees and began to beg to cancel the punishment, because he is quite a boy. He won't survive this. The concubine now received incredible pleasure, listening to how Sun begs at his feet for mercy. She felt almighty and almost immortal, and Solka, bowing her head, continued that she would never forgive herself if she did not save the young man's life. For 10 years of ridicule and abuse, she learned to manipulate them. I was not afraid of shame, pretended shame. The goal was to preserve life, the highest value of humanity. So she chose words that could be successful. Concubine Shin was delighted. She changed the readings to 30 blows and wrote off 20 to redeem the dream with her remorse. The girl thanked for the kindness. Shin left and the eunuchs immediately began to prepare for punishment. The boy was crying. There was indescribable fear in his eyes. Solka was by his side, begging him to survive, begging him to think about his brother who went to war. He must survive for his sake. After the punishment, he fell motionless. Eunjung, together with Solka, tried to bring him to consciousness, but he did not move. His eyes were open. It seemed that he was not breathing. Sun, in her heart, grabbed the knife. She could not stand this tension and injustice, and no matter how Eunjung begged her to stop, it didn't help. She had to catch up with Hoyen. No one else in the whole world would help her as well as her. Eunjung was silent. She understood that rebuttal would do nothing. Many centuries ago, an interested maiden descended to earth and noticed a mortally wounded young man. His breathing was barely noticeable. Blood flowed in pulsating spurts. These jerks became weaker every second and turned into a weak stream. The virgin realized that the soul was leaving him. She took a knife with a razor-sharp blade and cut her hand. The virgin's blood was healing. It could bring back to life even an almost lifeless body. When golden blood flowed from her flesh, the maiden gave the young man a drink of it and waited for his wounds to heal. The people of Yule were the descendants of a virgin and also had this property, but only a few knew about it. So Solka tried to save Hoyen by drinking her healing blood. Having made an incision, she directed the jet over the young man's mouth. The healing of a person can be long-term, but it will be successful. She knew that for sure. When Eunjung applied the bandage, Seolha confessed that the nanny was the first person she healed. Before that, only animals in the forest came across and they recovered faster. Nanny doubted that it was worth exposing this secret. But Sun objected. Because the young man has a family, it would be an unspeakable loss for them. The day seemed difficult. After all the events, I wanted to distract myself a little, change the flow of thoughts, so Solka went for a walk under the moonlight. The smell of fresh air was invigorating. During the years spent in the palace, she had many enemies, but there were also friends, good people. Today, while walking, she heard a familiar voice calling her. Sun was glad to see a kind uncle. He noticed a shadow of confusion on her face, and the girl reassured him that she was fine. Uncle put down the bowl and began to tell that he had also saved rabbit meat and some vegetables for her. Solka thanked him and reminded him that it was a big risk to come here. But the uncle laughed, called it trifles, and asked her to teach his daughter how to write. The girl happily agreed. When he leaves the palace, she thanked the guest once again for his kindness to her. But this day of unpleasant surprises was not yet over. An authoritative voice interrupted the conversation between Uncle and Solka. A city resident was caught talking to the emperor's concubine. The voice seemed familiar, and indeed she heard it today in the palace. It was Prince Yanwu. The uncle faced the death penalty for this. Horror permeated the whole being. Uncle began to apologize and make excuses that he had no such thing in mind. Sun, realizing that her presence would only make things worse, decided to run away, as if she was not there. And if there was not, there will be no reason to punish him. Grabbing the scroll, she ran. She ran with all her legs, but she was not as agile as the prince. Yanwu caught up with her in 2 steps and grabbed her fragile waist. It was not strong enough to break free from his powerful hands, but she did not give up hope, resisted, and did everything to free herself. Yanwu lifted her off the ground with one hand and carried her to the place where the uncle was kneeling in prayer. And only when the prince put her on her feet did he see that this was the same concubine he had seen in the palace in the morning. He was very surprised that fate had brought them together for the second time today. Sun immediately started with attack tactics. She loudly declared that the man was not guilty of anything, and she added that he simply could not pass by the hungry concubine. That's why he brought food. The prince looked at the scroll and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Is this role worth the risk? Yanwu leaned over the concubine and began to study her face, then said that it looked tired and looked intently again. Solka squeezed out words of entreaty, whispers. She looked into his eyes, his facial features, as if she were looking at the emperor, but still there was something else. She could not understand what exactly and did not know how to behave with him. Yanwu smiled and told her to pray for herself. Then he would let the man go. Thoughts were spinning in her head. She tried to figure out if he was telling the truth. But he is probably the same as his brother and you shouldn't believe him. She blurted out in one breath that if her husband was executed, she would report to the emperor that Yanwu had encroached on her innocence, and the hunter wanted to interfere and the prince killed him. Taking a breath, she added that he himself would be executed for raping the emperor's concubine. The prince was stunned by this plan, and then he smiled and turned to his wife, saying that this was probably the most ferocious creature he had ever hunted. The dream did not leave its formidable squall and promised that, dying, she would definitely take him with her. The prince was surprised and amused by this situation. When the prince asked if she was sure that the emperor would simply accept and believe her words about this situation, Solka understood that he was playing with her and enjoying it. She remembered the last meeting. She seemed to sympathize with all his words. But she decided that she should not hope that it would be possible to come to an agreement with him. She decided for herself, the enemy. The eyes filled with moisture and tears flowed down the face. They dripped so abundantly on the kimono that the prince suddenly ran his hand over his face, as if he wanted to make sure that they were real. A drop of salt water remained on the finger and shimmered under the moonlight. Yanwu watched her float as he turned his hand. The girl again began to look for answers to the prince's behavior. Just as she was deciding what kind of person he was, he did an act that did not fit into the picture of the image. Tears continued to drip onto the kimono. The prince was puzzled and said that he would let the man go, that he would only receive a severe reprimand. Sun exhaled and thanked Yanwu. She almost smiled, and the tears stopped rolling down my face. Yanwu narrowed his eyes and asked if she relaxed early. After all, he can change his mind. And he began to look intently into her eyes. Then he whispered that he hoped that the concubine would not think that he was violating her virginity and hugged her. Like a wild cat, she broke free from his embrace and hissed not to touch her. The prince was delighted with the behavior of this predatory creature, released it and watched. As Sun began to move away, he asked if she could get into the rooms through the fence. Of course, he was smiling at the same time, because it was obvious that the answer would be no. Solka bowed her head and asked to lead her. In a moment, she was already in Yanwu's powerful hands. She began to break out again, and he smiled so gently that she fell silent. A very strange feeling swept through the girl, as if calm had flooded over her, as if from her mother's embrace. But they still asked to put it up, because it would be a disaster if someone saw it, to which the prince calmly replied that each witness would be silenced forever, without even having time to utter a single sound. It became creepy. When the door opened wide and Unyoung saw Seola in her husband's arms, fell prostrate with the words of the Emperor's Majesty. And it dawned on me, this is the end of dreams about freedom. That girl smiled and told the nanny that it was Prince Yanwu. Meanwhile, he lowered her to the ground. Just as the girl thanked the prince for his help, she bowed low when she saw that a belt had fallen to her feet. Raising her head, she saw Yanwu taking off his outer clothing. His muscular body glowed under the moonlight, but Solka was frightened by this gesture. She asked the prince to leave her room immediately, and she apologized if she gave reason for such behavior. She continued to say that the emperor's guards could be nearby, and then there would be no overflow. And when the prince took her by the shoulders to free the passage, she screamed in general. She remembered when she heard that something heavy had fallen. She opened her eyes. A huge deer was lying on the floor, and the prince's soldiers were scurrying around. The questions stuck in his eyes. Then Sun began to ask what it is and how to understand it. But the prince seemed to pay no attention to her protests and objections. He ordered a fire to be made, and when Yanwu took out the knife, Sola fell silent, waiting for his next steps. The prince silently cut the animal's throat and, taking a cup, filled it with fresh blood. Then he hung up and offered the cup to the girl. She had to drink it. The dream froze. After some stupor, the prince said that he would suggest that she take the cup herself and drink its contents. It was said with a strain in his voice, hinting that otherwise he would make her drink. Taking a warm cup, she decided to drink quickly and with her eyes closed. She took several sips of the salty, thick liquid with a metallic taste and was stopped by the vomiting reflex. The cup fell out of her hands. The prince managed to catch Solka, who almost fell, and covered her mouth with his hand and told her to swallow. She cannot lose a drop of food. Barely overcoming the gag reflex, the girl swallowed the last drops. She was covered in blood and began to slowly breathe more and more calmly. And Yanwu loosened his grip. The prince said that in the kingdom which he recently conquered, there is a tradition that the husband and wife share the blood of a deer. The girl quietly replied that he was not at war now, and she was the emperor's concubine, so she asked her mother to show even a drop of respect. The prince smiled the most sincere smile, because he had no idea that this shaky marriage was so precious to her. But Solka did not stop trying to expose the prince, threatened that the emperor would behead her if he found out about these events, and her blood was on his hands. Her last phrase, that she will haunt him in his terrible dreams until his death, completely made the prince laugh. He wondered how she had lived so long with such a sharp tongue. Said she definitely needed a friend in the palace to survive. I offered my friendship. While the deer was spinning on the spit, they sat quietly, each busy with his own thoughts. Who was dreaming? Who was thinking about the present? Only the prince's entourage was scurrying back and forth without thinking. The meat gradually began to crackle. Then fat dripped onto the flame, and the strong smell of roasting wafted from the hearth. The appetite was rampant, and the stomach was already beginning to grumble. She tried with all her might not to pounce on the deer, which would have been ready in a couple more turns. The prince saw this hunger in her eyes. Frustrated, he exhaled heavily, thinking. He took the fragile pen in his muscular palms and said that she could eat as much as she wanted, because it was because of him that she was left without meat. Sun got up and summed up that you can't take back what you've done and invited the nanny to eat. Of course, Eunjung was also very hungry, so it didn't take long to ask her. Yanwu gave the tastiest part for Solha, and warned her to be careful as she might get burned. The opinion that the prince is not the same as the emperor became more frequent. If you don't think about what will happen to them if the emperor learns about it, then the party was a success. It was cozy and quiet. Everyone was talking, as if they were old friends. During the treat, Sun did not forget about Hoyan, and she took a piece for him. When he can eat, it will be a treat. The prince asked who Hoyan was. The nanny answered, a eunuch. A familiar name caught the ear of a military man, and he asked if he was dumb. It turned out that he was Hoyan's brother, who went to war. Question after question rained down on Solka. The girl calmed down the young man. The brother is just sleeping from sleeping pills so that his wounds heal more easily. He will recover soon. Here the prince calmed down the haste of General Ion, ordered to remember the hierarchy, and he began to apologize, bowing low. But Sun just smiled and told that Hoyan used to serve another concubine. She punished him. But now everything will be fine with him. Now he will stay here, and they can meet with their brother as much as they want. The young man had no words to express his gratitude and bowed low. The night was cool, and Sun moved as close as possible to the fire. The flames licked the branches that the warriors kept throwing up. Thoughts about the fate that brought them together today warmed them, and their brothers. The prince asked why she was upset, and the girl shared her fears that this visit would cause the emperor's anger. And her days in these walls are the last, so that there is no trouble. Yanwu smiled and reminded her that he promised to be her friend, so she shouldn't worry. When Sun looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity there, but was still afraid to trust. But since she has to leave the room forever, there is no need for friends. The prince mysteriously replied that it would be better for her to get used to his persona. In the palace, meanwhile, the celebration, food, drinks, fun did not end. The laughter echoed even in the far corners of the palace. Of course, every wall has ears and eyes ready to serve the emperor in the hope of a tidbit from his table. And now, someone has already reported about his brother and his concubine. Then, as if he said to himself that there was just a place next to him, for her, at his feet. Concubine Song arrived as ordered, bowing her head as usual so as not to annoy the emperor. Dressed in an elegant outfit with an impeccable hairstyle, she humbly sat next to him. The sycophants did not have to wait long for their speeches in support of the emperor. They praised the image that was revealed to them. Probably the emperor appreciates his concubine very much. To which he answered in the affirmative. Adding a question to Sun, after all, it is true and he appreciates it? Sola was silent. There is still quite a bit left to hold out until release. The emperor went on to say that he ordered the dress from the best seamstresses so that it would look like the emperor's outfit. But probably, it would be better to get into rags. He ordered her to get up. The girl obediently stood up and he continued his speech. Since the banquet is organized for generals who distinguish themselves in battle, it is a special day. And with the words, "For your attention, concubine son," he pushed her down with all his might. The last of the Yule people. Everyone began to whisper that the concubine was the last, and that the emperor was holding an intrigue. But he really, meanwhile, was silent and watched everyone whisper. The girl was alert, and rumors spread from mouth to mouth that all the capital's slaves from Yule immediately resolved themselves, as soon as they heard that the entire nation committed suicide when Sun was taken away. Emperor Youngkim picked up on the conversation and added that thanks to this they got rid of traitors with beautiful eyes, even though it cost a lot. He pushed the girl again, but this time she rolled down the stairs. In a second, he added that now he had to endure this mistake of nature, because it was the last. Of course, it was humor from the Great Lord, so everyone laughed. Only Prince Yanwu didn't laugh. He silently watched what was happening with his teeth tightly clenched. Then he approached the girl who was trying to get up and asked if she was sure that she would do without a friend in the palace. She looked up and was confused. Yanwu picked her up with his strong arms like a feather. She was frightened. No one has the right to touch a concubine, and here, in public. But he whispered to her not to worry. His broad-shouldered state stood before the emperor and said that he was sorry for touching his concubine, but he could not stand aside when the beautiful lady was in trouble. Youngkim smiled and said that of course he could not be angry with his own brother for his nobility. These games of Aspid Cube were dangerous, but the prince was not afraid. And the bishop added that he did not want this banquet in honor of his brother, the conqueror of new lands, to be devoted to tense conversations, and he suggested having fun. But fists clenched. The prince took the girl to separate rooms. Solka was walking with a limp when she fell down the stairs. She twisted her leg and now it hurt to step on it. When the doctor examined the leg, he advised not to be silent, not to hold back, but to say loudly that it hurts, and rather to shout about the pain. But she said that she would endure. The doctor prescribed some medicine and recommended walking very carefully, and the medicine will control the pain in the near future. Before Solka had time to thank the doctor, footsteps and laughter were heard. The emperor entered the room with his concubine. He desperately needs to release negative emotions, to relax. Seeing that Sun and the doctor were in the room, who fell to their knees to greet him, he ordered them to leave. But then he came to his senses and ordered the girl to stay. She stopped. The emperor unbuttoned his kimono and mastered the concubine he had brought, and Sun ordered her to look. He dug into the concubine's hair and entered her hard with pleasure, every time she screamed with each penetration, and the emperor kept ordering Sun to look at her. He said how beautiful she is. The fact that Sun obeys him and looks incited even more, and he, flushed with lust, penetrated even deeper and hissed, "Do not turn away. Look at me, Sun, it's the only thing you can do." That girl tried to look away every time she got a chance. Sweaty all over, sweat streaming down his forehead and chin with a predatory expression on his face, he was already reaching the final stage of his act and beastly roared for her to look at him. Her tear-stained face did its job. He squirmed in the tension, roared and went limp, slowly let go of the concubine, who was lying exhausted on the bed. Then Sun hovered over him and said, breathing heavily, that this was exactly what he wanted, and it was better that way. But when the emperor's breathing stabilized and he was about to leave the room, he looked at Sun and grumbled that she was a useless girl. When the emperor's concubine got out of bed, she asked Song if he had enjoyed the entertainment. And I wondered what exactly was the relationship between Song and the emperor. He hides a secret. She began to teach Solka that she can please the emperor without even going to bed with him, as there are many ways to please a man. She mocked with pleasure. The girl finally couldn't resist and shouted that enough is enough. She does not want to hear these speeches. When everyone left, Sun sneaked up on tiptoe and began to look around as if to pass unnoticed. Because Nanny, she must be worried. But just as she was about to run, her leg twisted again and she almost fell. Someone's strong hands grabbed her. Looking up, she saw that she was in the prince's arms. Said he was worried about her leg and came to visit. And yet in time, otherwise she would have fallen again. Solka thanked her for not leaving her in trouble. Yanwu looked into her eyes and said that there are rumors that the emperor can't bear the thought of sharing a bed with her, and now she is standing soaked in his smell. He probably values her very much. If he literally drowned in his vile smell, they must have found another way to communicate. Solka tried to say that indeed the emperor barely restrains himself from gagging when he looks at her, because not everyone has such strong stomachs as the prince. But Yanwu wondered why then he calls her to his rooms every night. She is his favorite concubine. Here the girl could not stand it and burst into tears. She started shouting how she hates it all. It was boring and disgusting to look at it. Every day since she came of age, she has endured the emperor's attacks and abuse for 10 years. She sobbed and was so sincere that she had not allowed herself to be with anyone before. Because of this scar, she lives as a vagabond and is despised by other concubines. And to live like this? The flow of the heart's cry stopped. It was closed by the prince's tender lips. Then he wiped away a tear that rolled down his face with his tongue. Solka was so embarrassed that she did not immediately deny what had happened in just a few seconds. She began to stamp her foot even though it hurt, and screamed that the prince had no right to allow himself such a thing. And she shouted something else and made noise, but the prince did not pay attention to her clamor. He gently pressed his lips to her scar and whispered that the scar does not seem ugly to him. On the contrary, it is even cute and beautifies her. Sun fell at the prince's feet and whispered that he had lost all fear, because they were in the emperor's palace. And he smiled, sat down next to him and said that it made no difference whether he lost his head here in the palace or on the battlefield. The girl screamed. Then he began to show exactly how to get rid of the head, and it was so funny that she started to smile, and then she laughed heartily. This pleased the prince. Moonlight spread across the evening sky. The emperor went out on the porch to be alone. He remembered the events of the evening with disgust. I thought about Sun, that she was useless. Ugly and just a laughing stock, but he can't do without her. Something inside is gnawing at him. He needs her. He needs her to be always by his side. Yanwu caught him behind these thoughts. He asked what was bothering his brother so much. At the same second, the emperor hid that he was thinking about something and turned to his brother with a smile. He asked what brought him here at such a late hour. The prince replied that he had an excellent story that would surely interest the emperor. He spoke confidently, as on the battlefield, when victory is so close that you can touch it. Youngkem looked up at his brother and asked if she really was unsurpassed. He loves such stories and will listen to them with pleasure. There was such a tension between them that the air seemed to crackle with density. And the news about the will of the late emperor, all rumors that the old emperor was about to hand over the reins to Yanwu, were eradicated. All who were involved, or even heard of such a thing, destroyed. Meanwhile, Yanwu himself was at war. The emperor's thoughts flew with great speed. Yanwu, meanwhile, said that before his father left for another world, he sent him a letter. Then he asked if the emperor wanted to know what was in the letter. He spoke slowly, easily, sure that the content of the letter would embarrass his lordship. But it was not so easy to scare him, and the plan was drawn up in a moment. He interrupted the prince with an apology, said that his brother resembled one of his concubines somewhat similar to him, and then he proudly raised his head and harshly said that she also always gets on his nerves. But he still can't get her out of his thoughts. Approaching step by step, he said that he could not decide what to do with her, and asked if he would tell him, like a brother. The words sounded harsh. This battle was won by the emperor. Yanwu was silent and looked him straight in the eye. Boiling inside, I wanted to rip his heart out, but he had to win this war without blood. Under the moonlight, Seolya and Eunjung were drinking tea. The girl remembered how the prince whispered that he liked this distorted half of his face better. The high mood did not hide from the nanny's eyes, and the girl said that it seemed so and smiled. No one noticed that Hoyan appeared in the doorway. He stood swaying, still very weak. A strong headache forced a groan out of him. The girls are back. There was no limit to the joy. One in front of the other began to chirp that they were glad to see him awake. But when Solka asked how he was feeling and he said, everyone cursed. The young man himself was scared to death and wondered that this was impossible, and he spoke and heard what they said. It was a miracle. He started talking non-stop. Solka interrupted him and told him to listen carefully. The boy fell silent, focused on the words of his maiden. She told him that she had saved his life, and this should be their secret, the strictest. Otherwise, they are all in dire danger. Hoyan agreed to remain silent. He added that he would not even tell his brother about it. Solha rejoiced at his recovery, and Eunjung was frightened and wary, because if the secret was revealed, they would never get out. Nanny said that Song's power is growing more and more every day, and it will surely happen tonight. That girl didn't want to hear about it now, tonight or not. After all, Hoyen had just woken up. She offered to chat over a cup of fragrant tea, but Eunjung insisted. The date of the next night visit was announced. After 3 days, there is no possibility to delay, she almost cried. Then Solka suggested that the young man visit his relatives in the evening. He looked at her anxiously, but the girl hurried to calm him down. She believed that he would keep the secret. Sitting in front of the mirror, she thought about the fact that her mother was troubled by the question. Could their power, which heals everything except death, be the key to the revival of their family? Looking at the tool, is this power a curse? She put the tool to a red-hot fire. She had to go through this pain again and again every time her scars got longer. Unbearable. She pretended that she was already used to it, but persuaded herself that she could. She should. She took the hot tool and applied it to her face as tightly as possible. It crackled. The smell of burning spread through the room. She almost fainted, but continued to mutilate her face. After finishing, she collapsed exhausted. But she had to do it if the Emperor finds out about her ability to recover. He will not let her go for anything. The nanny was crying outside the door. When she saw that the young lady had fallen, she ran up. And Sun said that this power is a real curse, what a great sacrifice her people made, and that she hates it, prays for death. The morning seemed hot. Sun sat at the table and admired this day. The nanny brought tea that can soothe the pain from the burn. While the girl was drinking tea, Eunjung prayed that the day would come when Solka would be able to forget this burn. Like a terrible dream, Solka wanted to calm her down. She said that she was used to it and it was not scary. But it was clear from the nanny's eyes that the girl's wound hurt her just as much. The door opened and Hoyen rushed in like a fury, shouting that he couldn't wait to meet them. Everyone started laughing. 3 people united against the whole world. He did not know how to come empty-handed, so now he brought a package. He said that it was John who handed over the sweets for the maiden. Solka laughed, because he likes sweets more than her. They hastily discussed that these sweets would be enough for 3 days. Although there is an eternal amount of them. But the days are long and you need to satisfy yourself with something. When he grabbed a tidbit, Eunjung at the same second swore at him. How dare he take something in front of a young lady? He apologized and spat out a piece. Everyone laughed. The nanny ordered never to do that. It's a good thing no one saw it. The girl, catching her breath from laughter, gently invited them to eat goodies from Brother Hoyen. Sun stood and thought that it would be good if the sun never set, and drove away the darkness of the night so that night could not come. Then we would not have to visit the Emperor's chambers. That night came and she was called. And it was not worth keeping the Emperor waiting, so it was necessary to hurry. They quickly rustled the hems of their dresses through the dark, long corridors. If the future did not come, then there would be no need to destroy your face every time. She looked at the reflection in the water passing by the bathhouse. Before visiting the Emperor's chambers, the concubines visited a bath with rose petals and various oils. Thousands of aroma candles were supposed to fill her with an exciting smell. But the sun always sets and night comes. This cannot be changed, so the ritual of visiting the Emperor's chambers cannot be avoided. Even if I could once again cause an attack and survive. On the night of the visit, every part of her body is washed and evaluated. The petals of the nipples seemed very pale, so they were tinted. It is as if a wild beast is being prepared for the Emperor. The body, like a sponge, absorbed the smell. The Emperor will like it. Cook, paint, dress. Everything is the best for the Emperor. And the maids tried, did everything just to please him, so that he could enjoy her appearance and, finally, master the maiden. And Solka lay and did not move and prayed. Prayed that nothing would happen again, that she would remain chaste. Just a little bit more will was visible. Time was relentless. And for an unbearable moment she was waiting in Youngkum's room in front of his bed. The assistants who were preparing her put Solka to bed. All the girl's thoughts were that he should already drive her away, as it was before. But this time it was different. She could feel him crawling away from her legs, slowly advancing over her. She turned her face away. I was waiting. In a moment I heard an order to bring a lantern. She was stunned, but she thought that it was for the best. When he looked at her disfigured face, the desire would immediately disappear. While everything was happening, Sun focused her attention on the butterflies and tried to think only of them, hoping that the moment when she will be chased away is very close. Closing her eyes, she mentally prayed again. How unbearably long this moment is, will it never end? She felt his paws on her, his breath, his body covering her. Then she heard a voice, this familiar voice. What it is? Who is this? Opening her eyes wide, she squeezed into the bed and almost screamed. It was not an emulator. Prince Yanwu, but how? What does it all mean? How can he explain it? And there were still many questions in my eyes. Some of them I uttered. Some of them remained in my thoughts. The prince began to take off his clothes. Solka was not ready for such a turn of events, and the sound of clicking fingers came to her as if through a dream. My head felt dizzy. I didn't want to believe what was happening. On the eve, the emperor praised his brother for peace in the capital of the empire because it is possible only thanks to the prince, who showed everyone the fury of his soldiers while he poured sake. The prince thanked for the flattering words and asked with a smile if he should not sit on the battlefield always, continuously. Yunkem confirmed that there is such an opinion. The only person in the world who allows himself to walk around his harem, together with his concubines, deserves to be punished. But this is impossible because he is my own brother. It's very difficult. I can't punish my brother. After all, he was once considered the heir, and now he is respected by all the generals. The prince is my blood. The emperor leaned forward and said that he considered it his duty to relieve suffering and spare punishment. The meaning of his words was twofold, and the prince listened warily. Then he drank sake and said that he was indebted to his lordship. And if he walks along and across his harem and even shares a bed with his concubine, and bends the knee. Dear brother, you can't lift a finger to stop me from doing that. After speaking, the prince looked at the emperor's pale face. But I did not wait long for an answer in this peaceful quarrel. Yunkem said that the number of his concubines is such that he willingly shared with his own brother. Their verbal duel led to the fact that the emperor had already prepared such a gift for his brother. He said that he has a concubine from whom he desperately wants to have a child, but he cannot do it himself, and asked if he could count on him. Yanwu nodded his head. Yes, that conversation was earlier. Now Sun was in the hands of the prince and was recovering from the event. He asked if she had lost her speech, or was she afraid for his life. Then he gently hugged her and whispered that maybe she was scared for her life. Sun could not resist his powerful body, strong hands. The prince wrapped his arms around her and gently nuzzled into her mouth. Solka understood that this was madness and certain death. It was both sweet and scary. She had never felt anything like this before. She could feel disgust for the emperor here. It was completely different, but fear prevailed. The snap of her fingers brought her back to reality and she broke free from the kiss. She looked into the prince's eyes and clung to him as if she were a part of him, and whispered that they would be executed. Her small, fragile body in the strong arms of the prince fluttered like the wings of the butterflies that surrounded them, flying to the light of the lantern. Yanwu whispered that he knew, but for their sakes, she had to do what he ordered for the sake of both of their survival. The prince turned her around and she saw the emperor. The last seconds of life have come, flashed through her head. I heard how the prince ordered to persuade the emperor to leave his life. You must pray to him if you want to survive. Ask and pray for mercy. Please spare your life. Words crept into her ears. Beg, beg. And Solka begged, asked for mercy and to give her life. Give life to both of them. The emperor looked at what was happening, at her pleas. Somewhere inside he was happy. But the fact that she is asking not only for herself is disconcerting. And then each subsequent plea of hers plunged him into memories. And he seemed to feel how the people tortured by him were crying for help. It is as if they are praying from the very den of the devil. The prayers were interrupted when the prince spoke as he restrained his attraction to her. The emperor stood and looked but did not seem to see anything. One more second told her to continue. Solka, completely powerless, with eyes full of tears that poured down to the floor, again persuaded, asked for mercy for both of them. While she was asking for help, she touched Youngkem's clothes. He felt such a shock through his whole body, as if lightning had pierced him. And again, thousands of tortured. He turned and headed for the door, then stopped and said that Song was his concubine, and this child she was carrying would be a member of the imperial family. Likewise, without turning around, he added that his brother should not stop, and only as the night approaches dawn. She will not leave the palace until her last breath. Will be mine, forever. Solka finally understood what had happened. And surely she will not be able to get out of this hated place. Solka sat and heard the emperor's words until now. She will remain mine until her last breath. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice that wondered what she was so busy thinking about. The girl, puzzled by the appearance of the prince, asked him to leave, because it was dangerous for both of them, his presence in her rooms. Yanwu took her hand, put it to his face and said that a man who spent the night with a woman couldn't help but come. Didn't she miss him? She removed her hand and, startled, stammered something incomprehensible. In the midst of this muttering, the prince realized that he was being addressed. Your Highness. With a condescending look and a slight smile, he leaned towards her and quietly asked her to call him by name. When the girl protested that it was impossible, that she had no such right, Yanwu said that it was a special privilege only for her since they were now together. Solka said that she had no idea what he was talking about, but the prince insisted, because that night he protected her virginity. Then he took her by the hand, and with a furtive look whispered that he had even deceived the emperor for her sake. Barely restraining himself, the prince hugged Solka and leaned against her, inhaling her delicate aroma that intoxicated him. He came because he was really worried about her. He told Junkum that he longs for her child because Yule's children bring happiness. Sun resisted and called it all absurd. The girl remembered how the emperor had said that a woman from Yule was capable of bearing a child. She would pay off handsomely, otherwise they would have gotten rid of her a long time ago. Tears flowed like a river from helplessness. The excruciating pain that pinched her heart could not help but touch the prince, and he assured her that if she carried the child, he would find a way to fix it. Sun took his word for it. Yanwu took her arm that had a scar on it, looked closely and said that he had a very similar one and unbuttoned his sleeve. The girl looked around. He was a little different. He remembered that he had it from birth, and the founder emperor had the same one as well as some of his descendants. Solka listened and looked out the window. It was evening and the last rays of the sun would soon hide behind the hill. She reminded the prince that it was time for him to go. Yanwu picked her up in his arms and shook her, causing the dress to fly away. He said that she was very frightened, but they have already crossed the last line, and since the road of death is prepared for them anyway, it is worth knowing even a drop of joy. At these words, he jumped out the window with her in his arms. She screamed and closed her eyes until he stopped. The prince asked her to open her eyes, she must see it. Squinting, she opened one eye first. Still holding the girl in their arms, they stood on the hill. She had never seen such a sunset before. The glow spread and gathered in the distance, licking the crowns of trees. The feeling of impeccability was overwhelming. The reflections of the rays shone in the eyes. Solka has never felt so free as now, in the arms of the prince. Loved. I was so absorbed by the beauty that I wanted not to return. Yanwu, with trepidation in his voice, pressed her fragile body and whispered that she should not come back. A few more steps down the hill and in front of them stood a horse, standing peacefully, plucking grass. Finally, Sun felt the ground under her feet, and tonight's surprises were not over. Horse? It was unnecessary to ask any questions, to be afraid and to worry. In Yanwu's brave hands, I didn't even want to think about anything. She had trusted him for a long time, and today, it was not the first time she was riding a horse, but she felt safe. While Yanwu promised her that he would catch a tiger or a bear. It was so easy and free with him. I was just happy. When Solka said that there was no need for senseless murders, the prince denied that they were not senseless, because she is the emperor's concubine, and there is no animal skin in the chambers. The concubine didn't see the point in these revealing ward outfits. Yanwu objected, convinced that it was important. The sun had already hidden behind the horizon. It became cooler, and during the conversation, the prince silently covered her with his cloak so that she would not freeze. This gesture was so simple for him, but he carried so much warmth and care, so much peace that sleep plunged headlong into this feeling. Throughout her life, no one took care of her like this, except her parents. Yanwu buried himself in her hair, and said that other people's scents easily lingered on her body and reminded him of the emperor. She was embarrassed and started to move away, but he restrained her. She almost fell off the horse. But if she wants, they can hurry, and this little walk will be over quickly. The child laughed. The walk was extraordinary. I wouldn't want to interrupt it. The prince asked what exactly made her laugh. She turned to face him and said that she was amused by the fact that they were walking and joking, while literally walking on the edge of a knife. Every second of this amazing evening could be their last. The horse stopped. Yeonwoo hurried off and asked her to stay on the horse. If the animal approaches, Aaron will drive it away. Aran was a loyal comrade in arms of the prince. They went through all the wars together and pulled each other out of battles where it seemed that there was no way out. The dream tried to stop the prince because all around, complete darkness. How can you hunt in such darkness? But Yeonwoo replied that the wind had died down and the prey could be heard more easily. He stroked the girl's hair and said quietly that it would not be long. To not worry about anything. Not used to caress, she tensed and squinted, and then nodded that she agreed. His stocky figure receded and faded into the darkness with silent steps. In a second, his outline melted away. Sun and Aaron looked towards where the figure had just appeared. Alone, the thought crept in that she could run away right now. Run away without a trace like the wind. Forget all these years. Like a terrible dream. But Eunjung and Hoyen? Here the horse began to stomp on the spot. Cock, 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 cock. Then the gallop started. The frightened girl grabbed the handles and squeezed them tightly with her small hands. Aaron ran. Although he was galloping and Sun could barely keep up, she caught the glare of two phosphorescent lights. She could not control the horse, but suspected that there was a wild animal in the thickets. Here Aaron stopped abruptly and rose to his feet. The girl could not resist and fell down. It hit me so painfully that I didn't realize that I was already on the ground. Looking up, she saw these lights again. A tiger was approaching her. Sun froze in place. She could not even shout, as if her voice had disappeared. She opened her mouth and there was no sound. While the girl was coming to her senses, Aaron ran up, started beating his front hooves, snorting. Little by little, he drove the tiger away. As the tiger did not try to crouch down to attack, the horse fought back. All events happened in a fraction of a second. Solka heard a voice behind her telling her to turn left. It was not necessary to repeat it twice, but the arrow still whistled so close that strands of hair were blown away by the wind raised by it. And this whistling remained in the ears for a long time. The shot caught the tiger just as he dared to jump, but it was the last jump in his life. The arrow that hit his own eye stopped him forever. Sun almost threw herself into the arms of her savior, but he warned her not to approach. It was dangerous until he was sure that life had left the creature. And indeed, these few seconds were enough for the tiger to control himself and make another lunge, but Yeonwoo was waiting for this, and the sword was already ready to repel the attack of the predator. The cold steel sting sank into the mouth of the ferocious tiger. He shuddered heavily. The prince could barely contain this mountain of wild muscles. Then once more, and it was already the last convulsions of the beast. In a moment, the frightened Sun was already nearby, asking where it hurts. "Are you not injured?" Surprised by her behavior, he replied that he was fine, but she had blood on her lip. But she did not notice it. Taking his chin, he raised his face to the moon that had risen in time. Blood on his lips, tears in his eyes, and boundless fear. But that fear was not the animal's face, but fear for his life. Yeonwoo leaned down and kissed those soft pink lips. And it became so safe again, he is near. It seemed that nothing else was necessary. I would forget everything that happened to her over the years. He stopped, wanted to look into her eyes to understand whether she had calmed down from this horror. But Sun, closing her eyes, bent him to her and pressed her lips to his. "Stop for a moment." The moon could not resist and watched the development of their feelings, smiling to myself and winking at the stars. Love will save our world. The fear of the presence of the beast had already left, and Dream was filled with a feeling of happiness that the prince was alive and he had protected her. Warmth spread over the body from the tenderness of the kisses. Meanwhile, her heart was pounding harder and harder. Her breathing became heavier. A strange feeling filled her. She had never experienced this before. She liked how Yeonwoo kissed her, caressed her, touched her, pressed his body to her flexible state. The face was filled with crimson. A soft moan escaped from the prince's touch. The desire to be filled with pleasure was stronger than prudence, but still part of the danger was disturbing, and Song said that the emperor could not spare them their lives. What happened? Again a moan of pleasure escaped from his lips. "Your Highness." But Yovna interrupted her, whispering that she should call him by his name. No need for these stupid titles. He wanted her from the first moment he saw her, but he did not dare to insist. He was afraid to frighten. Now she melts in his arms and he uncontrollably wants to feel her smell and taste. He is only a hound dog in the service of the emperor. and due to the whims of fate only has 1 for 2 blood. But dogs eat and bite whatever they want, and when they want. With that, Yanwu unbuttoned his clothes and exposed his muscular torso. Sun whispered that this was a luxury not allowed for her, and begged for protection for trusting him. He must preserve, at all costs, her life and the lives of her subordinates. Yanwu listened to her wishes, untying ribbon after ribbon on her dress. Is there only one desire to survive? It will not be difficult to do. A quiet, heavy whisper came from the girl's lips. With a broken breath, it was announced that the emperor would come for their heads, and then he would have to protect her. To the end. Yanwu looked at her carefully. That's why they both burn with such a thirst for her will to live. He passionately covered her with kisses, caressed her. The moan that escaped her lips was dull, low, sweet. Centimeter by centimeter, her dress slipped and her lips went lower and lower. The moon illuminated her naked, tender body, which had not yet been touched by a man's hand. Sun cried out as he touched the scar. It still hurt. But the prince was gentle. He admired him. For him, he was beautiful, but not for others. Yanwu was amused that the emperor winced every time he looked at her scar. He was like a spoiled brat. Looking at the girl in the moonlight, the prince said that she was incredibly unusual and could play on the emperor's favor to become the prince's wife. But she replied that she did not need it. Greed has a price, but it cannot afford such a price. Her mother left such words in her memory. Voices died down. Even the chirping of insects died down. Everyone thought. The prince silently looked at the woman he had longed for so long. She broke the silence. She was afraid that now it would get worse. He quietly and sadly said that he would keep his promise and she should not worry about it, if that is her will. While getting dressed, he straightened up and added that he would make her an empress, if only she agreed. And his speech sounded firm and confident. He did not listen to objections and with a smile asked to allow him, the dog, to do all the work, helped to put on clothes, easily picked him up in his arms, not allowing him to take a single step on his own, carried him along the night path. For so long I dreamed of holding her small, defenseless in my arms. Solka clung to his powerful torso and as in childhood felt safe. Such confidence that she would not be harmed was hard to imagine until now. I fell asleep from his warmth. There has never been such silence in these parts. It seemed that the smallest insect was afraid to wake the girl. Even the waterfall that flowed and thundered through the valley had to be silenced. The prince returned to the prey. The animal was lying still, but its skin was covered with blood due to the blow of the sword. This upset the hunter. Hoyan's brother was always there. He guarded the concubine's sleep and was faithful to his master. Yanwu asked him to make sure Sun didn't need anything. Thoughts that this girl was the one he had been waiting for 10 years flooded his mind. I remembered. Today he was waiting for a meeting with a seer who read the stars, and he still did not appear. They said that he should arrive soon. 10 years ago he burst into the palace to the old emperor, shouting that the bloody dawn had risen. He shouted that he saw her in the fate of one of the twins. In a past life he stole the most valuable treasure from heaven. This drew the wrath of the Jade Emperor. The young twin princes listened to a prophecy. One of them must end someone's life every day for a decade. Only in this way will the heavenly inhabitants give us mercy and forgiveness for this evil deed. And if not, then the country and the dynasty of the emperor will drown in blood and chaos. Yanwu remembered the seer's words word for word. He ordered to bring him immediately before the turd broke into him. This annoying curse, these disgusting attacks of the brother emperor. How sick of it all. Roared like a wild animal. The still warm carcass of a wild boar lay in the middle of the yard. The soldiers are ordered to tear it apart without damaging the skin. The prince planned to sew a cloak from the skin of this animal for his concubine. Solka was not happy with this idea and asked to speak with him alone. After waiting until everyone dispersed and they remained face to face, she remembered how she had told him earlier that she did not like senseless murders. But he tries for her. She needs to eat and dress. She needs to be healthy. The priceless lives of animals are not worth clothing or food. There was indescribable pain in her eyes, as if she had been harmed, and not a wild animal. Looking into her deep, bottomless eyes, Yanwu said she was more stubborn than he thought. But she should also think about those who will worry if she gets sick. Sun insisted. She could not forbid killing for personal pleasure, but she begged him not to do it, for her sake. After listening, he replied that he was sorry, but no matter what, he has no intention of leaving the hunt, otherwise he would not be himself. This is his nature. Solka accepted his words. However, she had already seen how their lives were given for her sake. Memories of a whole people who gave their lives so that it survived came to mind. The last words before leaving sounded quietly. If he intends to continue these murders, I asked him to never come here again. The deer that was hunted today jumped to the right, to the left. A high jump up and hid in the thickets. The arrow whistling nearby did not harm him. His faithful warrior, servant and friend General Ion saw that the prince was out of his mind. He had never failed before. Quietly wondered, maybe it's time to visit the concubine's son. His pride was gnawing at him from the inside. He couldn't get close to her because that's what she ordered. And my heart ached and squeezed every time I remembered her, and it was impossible not to think. While the prince stood motionless, Ion continued that the door to her chamber had long been loose, opened by itself at night, and holes had appeared in the ceiling through which he'd escaped. And Brother Hoyan said that a wasp's nest has been hanging under the ceiling for the 2nd year, and the young lady has been dreaming of a yellow blanket since last year. Every word settled in the prince's head like a heavy burden. How he uncontrollably wanted to be there, next to her and protect her from all troubles. And then he looked at his friend. I wondered how he understands his brother like that. For he is mute, or can he speak? The answer puzzled the prince. He simply takes into account what his brother wants to convey, not what he wants to hear. Nothing complicated. Now this thought hovered in his head like an annoying fly. After all, we really hear what we want, not what we are told. What he wants echoed in my thoughts again. Yanwu let out a loud breath. He ordered everything to be prepared by the evening, everything that will need to be done for the concubine's son, and tomorrow morning they will visit her. The general was pleased. When the gate opened and His Highness stood on the threshold, Solka was frightened. She reminded me that I asked him not to come, so what is he doing here? But her speech was interrupted by a wide-open gate, through which soldiers with boxes began to enter, and then a cart with luggage was located in the middle of the yard. She only heard how everyone echoed each other, fragments of the phrases, "Let's start from the gate," "Bring the blanket to the room." Solka stood motionless and did not utter a word, just watched. What can you say about Unshin? She rushed from room to room, from one corner of the yard to another with words of praise and thanks. And she said everything was wonderful and wonderful. Let's wait. This 3-cursed hole in the ceiling, through which all the heat came out, will finally be warm and cozy, and the draft will not howl like a wolf cub. Solka entered the bedroom and saw a yellow blanket there. She had dreamed of her for so long, especially on those cold evenings when the draft took away all the warmth. And when the girls went out on the porch, they saw a wasp's nest on the floor. Annoying wasps have been bothering me for the 2nd year already. Hoyan wanted to carry it away. But what a horror struck them all when a snake crawled out of the nest. He almost screamed, and Sun was so frightened that she jumped right at the prince, who came to see why they were making a fuss. He hugged her to him. How long he had been waiting for this moment, that she would be near, that he could touch her, even glance at her. And how much time I wasted because I didn't hear what she said. Solka was also infinitely happy to see him, and incredibly grateful for the help. As always, he did everything to make her carefree and happy. The evening descended quickly. They sat down to dinner. Hoyeon prepared dinner as Eunjung had taught him. Everything was as usual, and the food was the same as yesterday, and the day is not special, ordinary, summer, and evening as usual. Even the burn hurt the same. But the girl's heart was filled with happiness. Feelings that she could feel only when he was next to her overwhelmed her. It seemed that it blossomed just now and radiated light, heavenly radiance. Yanwu kept his eyes on her. Now he wants to be near her even more. He wants to melt in her. But he only managed to tell her to ask for anything if necessary. She didn't say a word, just looked at him with her bottomless eyes so that she almost swallowed him. How fortunate that he is nearby. Can she be happy too? When the girls were alone, Sun asked the nanny if she thought the prince would come in the evening. But she did not wait for an answer. The conversation was interrupted by the loud words of subordinates. "Greetings to His Majesty the Emperor." Again and again, closer and louder. Alarmed, they asked each other whether they were informed about the visit. The nanny said that the emperor did not look at this side of the harem and did not report the visit. He appeared majestically with his entire entourage. On the litter carried by the eunuchs stood the throne on which the emperor sat. The girls bowed low and shouted praises to the emperor. None of them could boast of joy from this visit. Nothing good should be expected. The emperor warned Sulka not to prostrate so sharply, because she could be carrying a child and it could harm her. She began to speak about the wisdom of His Majesty, but he stopped her, offered to get up and go to her rooms. Hearing about the rooms, the girl's heart sank to the bottom of her stomach. She trembled like a grass in a field. The emperor noticed that she was surprised and asked why. After all, he is the emperor and has the right to visit the entire harem whenever he wants. But Sulka said that she did not expect him. That is why she was confused, because she was not prepared for his visit. At this, the emperor's politeness was exhausted. He sharply ordered not to chat, but to go to the rooms and that no one dares to disturb them. Everyone heard the order. In the chambers, the emperor sat down and looked around. Sun stood nearby waiting for an order. But he only ordered to turn away. He still can't stand the sight of her eternal face. She had just turned away when he asked about the night walk, whether she liked it. Horror exposed all the girl's nerves. I was already hoping to say goodbye to my head, but she continued to listen. The emperor said she had to bear his child, his blood, so it's no wonder they spend time together with the prince. It was strange for her to hear this. He continued the conversation, saying that he was very generous, that no one in the world would allow his concubine to carry the child of another man, even a brother, and therefore, in front of the public, she will be like the mother of his child and his concubine, and this means that you will never get out of here, at least on your feet. Of course he was proud of himself. I was sure that she was carrying a child and she had no way out. But Sun herself was still uncertain, and therefore understood that her will was becoming distant, unattainable. She fell on her knees in front of him and began to beg him to let her go to serve Lord Buddha. She promised not to disturb him with her appearance until the end of her days and to remain in the monastery. This is probably what the emperor was waiting for, the moment when he could manipulate her. He smiled, squinted his eye and asked if she could do him a favor. The snake whispered, "If she agrees, he promises her freedom." Hearing these words, she agreed to fulfill his whim if it would help her leave the harem. His desire spread in black whispers, poison, a small thing for which he promised to give her a place that would become her home. She will have the most expensive silk. She will not lack food until the end. He hissed all the time, planted in her the idea of freedom from the harem and from him, so longed for by her and almost attainable, just one small wish of his. Nothing extraordinary is needed. Sun listened and said that she just wanted to go with her servants, but the emperor continued that he was like a rolling pin that was annoying. The brother is poisoning his reign, because all the power of the empire is gathered in his fist, so the emperor's hands are tied. He is a respectable commander who has won victories for decades. It is difficult to take him out of the game if the emperor does it. The whole country will not be happy. Sun did not believe what she was hearing. Looking up, I wanted to make sure that I was wrong. I didn't understand that it could be true. And the emperor directly said that he ordered her to kill the prince, the general of the entire empire. Kill him! He spoke with a strain in his voice, so that she would have no more doubt that she understood correctly everything that was said. And he threatened to keep quiet if he didn't succeed. Otherwise he would pay with the head of his beloved nanny. Then he smiled and added that he wanted to tell her a secret. It was the prince who brought her here 10 years ago. It was he who snatched her from her mother's arms and brought her to the harem. Sun could not believe her ears. He continued that many questions followed, and did she really think that her entire people had really committed suicide? Is it possible? Has anyone helped them all with this? Of course, the butcher brother, feeling bloodlust. He destroyed all the women in his animalistic fury. The emperor described these pictures very picturesquely, in order to awaken in her hatred and a desire to kill her brother. The girl listened. Every word was cut by the blow of a sharp blade. But she did not want to believe it. She could not believe it. I remembered their meeting, those words about merciless pain and her scar, and those words now appeared in another world. It turns out that he knew her even before this meeting. But if he knew her for a long time, then he knew where she got this burn from. The thought shocked her, but the emperor did not notice, because a lot of news fell on her. Through tears, through grief and pain, she asked His Majesty to give her word that she would leave the palace with the servants if she complied with this order. It was the happiest moment for him. He briefly swore, "So it will be." In my heart I was celebrating the victory. After all, that conversation with my brother about the will of the old emperor was not forgotten. He gave her a secret sign with which she can go anywhere, leave and return to the palace. When the agreement was reached, looking at the girl, he thought that his brother cleverly captured this misunderstanding. And from love to hate, one step, so he himself is to blame. He leaned over and hissed that she was a shameless whore, that he treated her with a sincere heart, and she had enough impudence to give herself to someone else at the first opportunity. He hinted that she should have said then that she would rather die. After waiting a second, he stood up and looked at the tearful concubine. The matter is done. His thoughts were beyond anyone's reach, and he was thinking now that Yanwu would soon die, and she would follow him. Solka sat in the room, holding the pass from the palace, and cried. Only Buddha knows how difficult it was for her now. Conspired to help people. She had to kill the dearest person. How he carried her in his arms. How they walked on horseback. How he interceded for her in the palace. How he treated her to venison, his touch, his smell, tender kisses. She sat and fought with herself. It couldn't be. He couldn't treat her with such tenderness and be the murderer of her mother and her people. As soon as the emperor left their court, the nanny hurried to Solka. She did not expect anything good from the visit, and she had never seen the young woman so grief-stricken. Song asked the nanny if it was true what the emperor had said, that her people had been killed in the most brutal way by Prince Yanwu. Did all the Yules commit suicide? And she told about the emperor's proposal, and since she cannot kill anyone, then either they die or run away, and asked Unjung to run away together. All those plans that they built for the spring became a myth. The girls cried because they were powerless to change anything, and even if the prince's act is true, she loved him too much. After crying all the tears, they sat on the porch and discussed that they would not involve Hoyan. They would send him home to his brother, and they would leave as soon as Sun was ready. She simply could not stop thinking about the prince every second, and she remembered his words that he would make her an empress. And then Solka, obeying common sense, thought, a loyal subject could not say so. Perhaps the prince is planning a coup. Oh, Buddha, it crossed my mind, but they are trying to kill each other. And she said out loud that the fraternal ties between the emperor and the prince are strange, because they must protect each other. The nanny smiled. She was very lucky that they met because few people are so sensitive. Thinking that she should protect both the nanny and Hoyena, Solka went to the room. It was dark, and she began to light a candle. But the flame plunged her into memories. The bloody picture of the deaths of the people of Yule made her sick, dizzy in her head. Whether it's memories or scenes drawn in detail by an emulator, the heart ached. She went to the mirror in which she looked every night to make sure that the scar was still ugly, and it was not time to renew it. But she saw her bloodied mother in it. She was lying on the floor and breathing heavily. Her wheezing could be heard even through the mirror, a cry for help, how she asked for help. And here she turned and looked straight in the eyes, called her only daughter. Frost swept over Sun's body. She had never felt such horror. And the silhouette of the man in the reflection almost drove her crazy. She screamed at the top of her lungs. It was a prince. As always, he kindly said that he wanted to see her even for a moment, and she has no reason to be so frightened. There can be no one here except him. But her bare shoulders tempt him to linger longer than he expected. He himself is as safe and as affectionate as before. He compared himself to an animal, which is tempted to try again and again what it has already tasted. He carefully placed her on the bed and slowly, caressingly moved past her fragile body. Thoughts about the fact that it was time to take out a knife and put it in his neck before he suspected and let go did not leave her. But there was so much tenderness in him. He covered her body and hands with thousands of kisses. And she now had such a strong struggle that even on the battlefield there was no such confrontation. Tears flowed like a river. Yanwu asked her not to cry because she had nothing to fear. But she was now, even with him, still alone in this world enveloped in complete darkness. Solka was afraid that it would always be like this. Darkness, darkness, and not a single ray of light. Yanwu wiped her tears and covered her with kisses because now he is next to her in this darkness. He called her Miss, but she asked to be called by her first name only, as he had once asked her to. At least in the moment when he presses her to him, so passionately and so sweetly. Then she threw herself into his arms and asked to go outside, as he had once taken her to the forest. As last time Aaron was nearby, so the prince picked her up in his arms, put her on a horse and took her through the moon forest. He saw that the girl was filled with longing, but he did not dare to ask. After some time, she dared to ask the prince if it was he who brought her to the harem, and can she ask him about the death of her people? To which Yeonwoo calmly replied that she probably doesn't remember, because she was already unconscious. It really was him. As for the people of Yule, he learned about their death already in the palace. The only thing he knew was that Yule, who lived outside the settlement, also committed suicide, or someone helped them do it. She was the only one left alive, but he was happy about it, because if they found at least one Yule, they would be sent to the harem, and Sun would then be executed. Sun remembered the emperor's words that she, a monster, was allowed to live, as if in a fog, but remembered. It was when he met the emperor's eyes for the first time. When the girl said that the deaths of others do not bring her happiness, the prince said with such warmth in his voice that he did not agree. For him, only her life was valuable. If only he knew what longing her heart is filled with, and what struggle is going on in her head. The thoughts of whether she could trust him were buzzing every second with thousands of voices. And suddenly Solka asked him to teach her to ride a horse. This request quite surprised him, but he began to tell that first of all she should understand the horse, be one with him. The girl listened, eagerly absorbing every word. She should move with the horse in such a way as, for example, on that passionate night when she moved with him in the uni. But Solka interrupted his passionate thing. She was ashamed of such conversations, and she hinted that he desperately needs to learn court etiquette. The prince was amused but apologized, as he is a man hardened by wars. Then he fell silent and quietly said that if she didn't like it, he would change. Taking the horse by the muzzle, he turned it towards himself and said that he had the most beloved person in the world on his back. Aaron, it seemed, was indifferent to the prince's crush. He just snorted. Yeonwoo added that the horse should take care of her, then grabbed the reins and ran, spurring the horse on. Sun grabbed onto the saddle in fright. The prince shouted to squeeze his legs. Tick-tock-tock. He gave commands to feel the horse's movements, to become one with him. But the girl's numbness had not yet passed, and he was not very successful in following orders. The wind was blowing his hair. The man, with whom it was always cozy, ran beside him at an easy pace, not letting go of the leash. Little by little, she began to master herself. I began to feel the horse. She moved in time with him and realized that she was no longer shaking like that. She seemed to be rushing like the wind. The prince looked at her smiling face. She finally cheered up. Alarmed by the pounding of hooves, a flock of crows rose into the air. Solka admired how they closed the sky, but not for long. Crows came down, one touched her hair. The girl got scared, screamed, scared the horse. With a loud roar, he stood on his back. He tore the reins from the prince's hands and galloped off. Sun was not ready for this. She dug into the horse's mane as hard as possible, squeezed it with her legs. A horse galloped along the path. The prince ran after him. He ran and shouted for her to let go of the turrets. She was afraid, thought she would fall, but he shouted loudly to make her believe. She obeyed and let go, but as she thought, she quickly flew off the horse. But Yeonwoo managed to pick her up in his arms. Although they eventually fell, that beloved was intact. The hearts of both were pounding with fear, as if they were about to break free. When Solka opened her eyes and met his eyes, she saw such horror in his eyes and such happiness at the same time. She didn't utter a word. She just sank into his mouth, realizing that he was the only one for her in the whole world, just as she was for him. Then she expressed a desire to wash herself, because she and her clothes were all dirty. The prince looked at her mysteriously and agreed. They would wash together, and he led her to a lake into which a waterfall flowed. In the night waterfall, the stars were reflected in the drops of water. While washing off the dirt, she thought about the emperor's visit, about his condition to be released. Thoughts were confused. Life flowed like water through the fingers. Of course, she wanted to be free from these abuses and mockery. To be free, but not at the expense of someone else's life. Especially a prince, his actions speak for him. She saw how he looked at her, felt his feelings, that fear for her when the horse carried. Everything without words was visible in his eyes. She was washing off the dirt, and tears were quietly rolling down her face, as if dewdrops were gathering in large peas and rushing to her chin, and from there falling into the watery abyss. Absorbed in thought, she quietly said that this was all so wrong. But the prince heard her. His muscular torso cut through the water. It seemed to disperse in front of him by itself, enveloping his body and joining behind him with a splash, forming a bubble dance. Wrapped her up and asked, what is right in her opinion, and pulled the ribbon that held her shirt. The Lego ribbon came untied and the shirt spread out on the water splash. The act was unexpected for Solka at that moment. Her protest was not long in coming. Covering her bare breasts with her hands, Sun jumped away from Yeonwoo as if stung. Then the prince asked, "What exactly does she think is wrong?" And the girl did not have time to say that they should not. Her mouth was closed with a passionate kiss. Only he will touch her with his lips, hands, and everything she wanted to say becomes unimportant. Only what is happening now is important, and now she is so sweet in his arms. And his words that he was waiting for this above all else, as long as their misunderstanding lasted. And please be honest with yourself. After all, only feelings are important, rules are nothing. But now a storm was raging in her. She can't be honest with herself. What can this lead to? What will happen to Eunjung if she succumbs to Yeonwoo's tenderness and betrays the emperor? The prince was afraid not to let her fall into despair, asked her to look at him. But when she looked, she saw two faces in one. He longs for one and feels disgust for the other. In that second, everything became so confused that few brains did not explode. I looked at my beloved and heard the voice of the emperor. His promises to be released forever. His pass from the palace. She absorbed the prince's gaze with wide-open eyes, but her being was not with him at that moment. Yeonwoo saw her condition, whispered her name, his gaze focused. She fell into this moment and looked piercingly into her very soul. Thoughts about the desire to be with this man and the need to take his life dissipated. Since she is destined to fall into this abyss anyway, why not indulge now, and the difficult decision will wait. Sola indulged in kisses and hugs, but when Yeonwoo came close, she turned away. She had never done this before, a virgin. The prince looked around her and asked how she assumed that he had experience in this matter. After all, his life since his youth was spent on the battlefield and there was no time for such thoughts. The waterfall began to roar louder to hide in its hum the sweet moan that came from the shore. The moon hid behind a cloud so as not to be disturbed, and only the stars twinkled. She asked not to hurry. None of them had ever felt such a burning fire piercing the whole body, and he whispered that he would always be around. She seemed to him now like a moth that would break free and fly away. He held her gently and firmly at the same time. I asked her not to hold back, to be herself as her heart dictates, and she followed this request, surrendering to passion for the first time and, as it were, for the last time. Proximity took all their strength and they lay exhausted but happy in the open sky. The prince asked if she had heard the legend about her people, the myth that the heavenly virgin had the gift of healing. The girl was wary, said that her mother had told her this legend, that they were descendants of a goddess who healed people. Yeonwoo exhaled heavily. Then she knows why the emperor is so obsessed with keeping Yule's offspring close to him. He continued the story. A curse of the strongest love was imposed on the ruling dynasty. This is known only to a select few. A long time ago, a virgin made a young man drink her blood and nursed him until he got back on his feet. But the young man, who was of low birth but with a pure heart, fell so in love with the maiden that he pretended to be sick for a long time so that she would come again and again. The time has come when the maiden announced her return to where she came from. They will not meet again because she serves the Jade Emperor. The young man begged her not to go, because he loves her unconditionally. And even though he is a mere mortal, her heart desires. The heavenly maiden also felt the call of her soul to this young man, and when she heard about his feelings, she decided to stay in the mortal world. Spring replaced winter, autumn replaced summer, years passed and they loved each other with pure love. And soon the world saw the fruit of their love. The flow of this great love was concentrated in a little girl who shone more and more every day. Growing up in the care of her parents, she did not know a moment of turmoil. But happiness cannot last forever. One morning the parents heard the ground shaking and saw a fire that was sending out clouds of smoke. The daughter's shrill cry frightened them quite a bit. Parents began to ask why she screamed, what scared her so much. The child, sobbing, stuttering, spoke simply, unintelligibly. But finally the parents understood that there was a person. A stout, bloodied man lay nearby. The war even reached the outskirts of the country. They stood aloof, not even dreaming of seeing such a thing today. But the maiden could not watch how life left the warrior, and shouting to her daughter not to leave her father, rushed to help. After examining the warrior, she said that he had lost a lot of blood and it was necessary to save him. But the man was against it. He was afraid of causing disaster. He thought it better to just leave and forget. He tried to persuade his wife. He pointed out that a warrior dressed as a nobleman, a person from the imperial palace, is dangerous. The Virgin said that this was no reason to leave a person to bleed, and reminded that it was the same with him, and how no one should understand a person who was in the face of death. At that moment, the warrior grabbed her hand and with his last strength asked to save him. He did not want to die. The pin that held the Virgin's hair came in handy now. She scratched her wrist with it and blood began to drip directly into the stranger's mouth. The healing liquid filled the warrior. The Virgin looked up at the man and said that she cannot pass by the one who is suffering, whoever he is. She had never seen such anger in the eyes of her lover. He clenched his fists. But when would this stranger wake up and want to take her? What will stop him? If he had a desire to possess a heavenly maiden, how would it be with him? What then? He wanted to be the only man in her life, the only one who was honored to drink her healing blood. But the maiden, unmoved, continued to heal the stranger, and told the man that he was worrying in vain. He is the only man in her life. The maiden was very kind and naive, rushed to help everyone, even the animal that fell from the tree and injured its paw. The man was now seething with jealousy. They consumed him. The man saw that the stranger had come to his senses, congratulated him, and informed him that he was a commoner in the hunt. He spoke with dislike. The nobleman asked what happened. Whether the war was won, he did not know about the course of the war and answered extremely reluctantly. The stranger tried to get up. He was still weak. He asked if it was he who healed him or maybe someone else. The man became even more wary. Is it really important? Can't you just thank him for bringing him back to life? He wanted his predator to leave as soon as possible. The stranger carefully looked at him and thanked him for his care. But it is clear from his calloused hands that he is hardly familiar with the art of medicine. And just at that moment, when the stranger asked to meet his savior, a voice came from behind the door and a request to enter. The man exploded. He shouted that she should not come in, that she should stand behind the door and not even open it. And the stranger firmly said, "Come in." The man tried with all his might to protect what did not belong to him. Jealousy tore him apart and he did not want to lose his beloved Virgin, but expected only trouble from a stranger. Such stubbornness surprised the stranger and he asked why he was protesting like that. After all, he is not a thug. The man replied that this is exactly what he thinks. This outraged the nobleman and he said that he had never seen such arrogance. He was his emperor, and for such things he must be executed. The maiden listened to their conversation behind the door, and after hearing it, the door opened and she fell on her knees begging for mercy to His Majesty. I begged him. The man just really cares about his loved ones. She asked for forgiveness for her insolence. She asked for mercy. The emperor looked into his tear-filled eyes. Looking at her, he is sure that her husband does not deserve forgiveness, because he is a person of low morals who cannot protect her. Taking the Virgin by the hand, he gently asked how she managed to free him from the clutches of death. After all, it is impossible to heal from such wounds as he had. No doctor would help him to return to life from that condition. He remembered, even though he was extremely weak, how she argued with her husband about his treatment and remembered the taste of blood on his lips. Taking her hand, which was wrapped in a ribbon of fabric, he realized that she had drunk him with her blood. But where did she get such a gift from? Or maybe he dreamed it. Because of severe wounds? Here the man couldn't stand it. Said that they just moved him here and took care of him. But the emperor ordered to shut up, for a lie. He will tear out his tongue. He was furious, screamed that they could poison him. At that time a little girl appeared on the doorstep. Frightened, she cried and claimed that it was not poison. The child fell to her knees and shouted that her mother is a celestial virgin. The girl did not understand the consequences of what was said then. The Virgin began to understand. And only the man knew from the beginning. Trouble. The child continued to reveal the secret. A mother's blood has the power to heal any wounds. This is a blessing. She began to beg the emperor not to harm her parents, because they just wanted to save him. The emperor looked at the mother and the girl, looked at the man, who was still standing as tense as a stone, tossed a gold coin with the words that he would leave them in the morning. He ordered the coin to be taken to the local judge, to tell what had happened, so that he would give guards to accompany him to the palace. When asked whether he would leave them in peace, the emperor replied that he believed the girl. She would not have lied, which means he was grateful to them for his salvation. Then he added that the girl was well behaved. Unfortunately, there is now a war, but as soon as it ends, they will be generously thanked for saving the emperor. The next morning the maiden brought breakfast, asked permission to enter, and not receiving an answer, entered. There was no one in the room. She looked around, called His Majesty. He called unexpectedly. The breakfast she brought fell out of her hands and spilled all over the floor. The emperor apologized for scaring her. He went hunting because he saw that they were not living well, and that there was barely enough food. And as a sign of gratitude for their help, he hunted a deer. So now at least they will have plenty of food. The maiden was joyfully surprised by his act, thanked His Majesty for his kindness. The emperor had not seen her husband today, had not expected him to leave them alone. The virgin said that she does not risk leaving the forest, so the man always goes to the village himself. She said that the husband says that the villagers will chase her because of her healing blood. The emperor doubted that the whole village knew about the properties of her blood, and he, the emperor, was the last to learn about it. It's hard to believe, and they eat meat only on their daughter's birthday, because a man does not like to take life. She left heaven to see this world, but her husband forbids her to leave the forest. But it is enough for her that her husband is with her. The emperor listened and wondered. If she says that in the presence of the emperor, then her husband is more than the emperor to her. She apologized if she offended with such things. She just wanted to tell that they love each other. The emperor asked her if she was sure about it, pointing out that her clothes were made of coarse cloth. Her face was marked with lack of food. He locked her in the deep forest, not allowing her to come out, made her believe this lie about bloodthirsty peasants. What loving man would behave like that? Is she sure that he loves her? The maiden protested violently. But the emperor calmly and gently said that this is not love, but he would never be able to neglect her like that, and asked to become his wife. That virgin asked to stop this conversation. It is wrong because her heart belongs only to her husband. The emperor did not stop. What did the man repay her for such boundless love, except that he tasted her flesh? The maiden could not bear to listen to the emperor, because he does not know anything about them, and she apologized and got ready to leave. But no matter how sorry she was, she continued to listen. The emperor voiced his observations. The man looks healthier than her. His clothes are better. He sits down to eat. First. Her eyes filled with moisture. She protected love to the end. It is inside, not outside. And she will not leave her lover. The emperor has already given many arguments, but her eyes are blinded. In the rest, he said that he would kill her husband, take her with him and show her what it is to be loved. The maiden broke free and ran to the hearth, grabbed a burning branch and, at the emperor's warning, said that her husband loved her, which means he would love her no matter what, no matter how much the emperor persuaded her. It did not work out. She came to this world 10 years ago for love, and if she proved that he loved her, she asked the emperor to step down. She raised a burning branch to her face and dug its coal into the young skin like an eagle digs its talons into a victim. The emperor rushed to her, took a branch, put out the fire that burned his face and hair. She fell on her face with a cry of unbearable pain. The girl was crying. He did not know how to console her and what to do to extinguish the pain from that severe burn. His heart sank as if it hurt him. She begged to give her word if she proves that her husband loves her not only for the flesh, let him leave their home. At that time the man returned, his voice behind him, saying how he was in a hurry, how he missed her. The fact that she did not rush into his arms alarmed him, but he kept saying how he rushed to her. Words could not describe how sad he was. When she turned and looked up at him, her face was disfigured by a burn, and there was so much love and hope in her eyes. But she did not expect such a reaction from her lover. His gaze penetrated to the heels. He asked, "What's with the face?" But there was not a drop of warmth in the voice. Retreated. Such a misunderstanding, but it's her, his very virgin. Beloved told her to go away and not dare to approach. Called a monster. Thousands of knives dug into the girl's heart at the same time. No one has ever felt such pain. The pain of the burn was excruciating compared to the pain of a broken heart. Only the emperor's heart throbbed. He wanted to open her eyes, but she so blindly believed the man. At this noise, the daughter came, her eyes still half closed in a doze. She asked her mother what happened, while the daughter asked her father to help her mother. The heavenly maiden understood that all her fears were true, and how this truth hurts unbearably. At that moment, she knew such a longing that she would not be able to overcome. For a moment, I did not understand how to live on, and in 1 second she jumped to her feet, grabbed her daughter by the hand and ran as far as possible through the forest and meadows. They raced as much as they could. That daughter started to cry. She was scared. She didn't understand what was happening. The maiden hugged her and apologized for having frightened her. How long they ran, but the emperor caught up with them. He asked the girl not to worry. Her husband will receive a severe punishment. And then he began to beg her to go with him, to allow herself to be loved. He would love her with love scars on her face or wherever. He asked to be his wife. The virgin interrupted him. It was he who brought trouble to their home. She shouldn't have saved him. After thinking about it, she said that probably this man should not have been saved. When she said this, she stood on the edge of the abyss. Another word, another step, and a frantic child's cry. Boundless fear in the eyes of the emperor, who was not afraid of anything and even death. Second, moment, eternity. The whole dimension of time in one moment. The virgin flew into the abyss, and it became easier for her, and the souls of those who remained on the edge were heavier with grief every moment. The emperor flew like a bird to the foot of the rock. The girl lay almost breathless. Raising her fragile body, he asked bitterly why she did it. She barely audibly said that she came down to this world for love, but it was chasing a mirage. She has nothing more to do in this world. The emperor persuaded her not to speak. To save her strength, he is here, he is near. Begged her to stay with him, and he will love her as she deserves. He never believed in love at first sight in his life. But when he saw her, everything changed. She will be dressed in whatever she wants. She would always be full if only she remained. She looked with bottomless eyes and whispered that she had heard these same words from her husband, and he was no different from him. She begged him to let her go. The last words he heard were about her returning to where she came from. The emperor was sobbing. He was now in pain as much as she was when she saw the suddenness in her husband's eyes. But did she have a healing gift? Why is she not healed? Why did you leave? He begged her to open her eyes. But wait, of course. The thought that flashed through his mind was far-fetched, but he couldn't help but try. I found a sharp stone because in its veins, her healing blood. And with all his might he punched his hand. Blood gushed out. She shouldn't die like this. He should save her. And he directed the trickling stream to her half-opened mouth. He tried so hard. Realizing that this would not help, he turned to the heavens, begged, demanded to open the way for her to be reborn, so that he could be with his beloved, if not in this, then in another life. And over the abyss stood a little girl, filled with grief from the loss of her mother who has gone to heaven, and her father, who simply had no business with her. Prayer did not help, but the curse worked perfectly. From generation to generation in the ruling dynasty of the Teso Empire, princes were born with a deep scar on their hand, and they were prophesied to shed blood daily in order not to lose their minds in maddened madness. And when they ascended the throne, these princes brought hunger and misery to the country, and the curse will be destroyed only when the maiden returns from heaven and gives her heart to the prince. Only now did Sola understand why Yanwu hunted every night. He simply had no choice, and she read him morals. But this knowledge did not make it easier for her. Now the thoughts were swarming. Maybe he knew about her healing abilities, because he was the one who took her from the settlement. And how did he plan like that? And if he so wants to lift the curse? And what if insanity took hold of him and it was he who exterminated her people? Sun's thoughts became more and more terrifying. Eunjung and Hoyeon brought dinner. Noticed that Seola was very pale. But distracted from her thoughts, she smiled and assured that everything was fine. Hoyeon also practiced in the kitchen this time. Today he cooked rice and fried it in his own way. He was already getting impatient. He asked to taste it. He wanted to hear the young lady's response. He was sure that she would like it. Tea. As she praised him, he was simply beaming with happiness, but he still needs to learn, because he is not yet up to Eunjung in cooking skills. They laughed, and the nanny said that in her presence he literally does not shut up. Hoyeon said that he loves to talk to no end. And then they all heard something fall. Hoyeon's brother stood at the door. Behind the conversations, they did not hear the door open. The scroll fell from his hands, and stuttering, he asked his brother if he could really speak. General Yan? All three were so scared that their secret was revealed. It was equal to death. If the emperor finds out about it. John shook his brother and insisted that he answer. Hoyeon said he had no intention of keeping it from him, but he couldn't tell either. But how did this miracle happen? This is impossible. You were born dumb. These and many other questions poured out of his brother's lips, but Hoyeon could not answer any of them. John already started to get angry, but then Sulka said that it was her fault. She asked him not to tell anyone. The general said so angrily that he didn't care. and then rushed at his brother so decisively that Sun was afraid for Hoyan and shouted that he was not to blame. He was following her order. But the general rushed to hug his brother and share with him the joy of this event. Sun turned pale. Eon praised the heavens for this happiness, and Hoyan cautiously asked if he was angry that it was a secret. He laughed. Little by little, the main thing, it happened. At this moment, they were all filled with joy. Some from the unexpected news, some from the fact that they are safe, and most importantly, they need each other and are happy to be together. General Yan bent his knees over Sun. Words of thanks flowed from his lips, as if he had just begun to speak, not Hoyan. Solka said that his brother was always very kind to her and she is grateful to him for that. And she asked not to tell anyone about this secret, not even to the prince. She would like to tell the prince about this news herself. The request is serious, but she hoped he would promise to keep the secret. Ion understood everything, and everything that the young lady did for her brother was worth this promise. But keeping a secret is tantamount to treason, so he asked her to inform the prince as soon as possible. Now the prince has important business and he is away. But John hoped that as soon as he returned, Solka would immediately inform about this news. Everything was tangled in a tight ball. All the secrets were already bursting out. Unsolved questions captured the head, soul, suffocated. Today there was neither Hoyan nor the prince, so Seola decided to renew her scar. The nanny always supported her, but recently Sun did everything herself. Like today. Solka was grateful to her for her care and the nanny stayed nearby outside the door in case help was needed. Of course, it is impossible to get used to this pain. Daring to take the hot tool, she thought that when she could leave the palace, she would forget about the pain forever. Eun-young was praying outside the door, and the girl dreamily thought that the two of them would be able to go as far as possible from here and live in peace and quiet together. Thoughts about the prince still haunted me. All the memories about the moments, minutes, hours spent together. Now everything was in a delusion, because she must. She must kill Yanhwa to break free. But can she bring herself to do it? On the scales, will and love are an impossible choice. Convincing himself that the prince could be involved in the tragedy of the people, and the nanny's life depended on it. Sun determinedly took the tool to renew this terrible burn. The thought that he cannot and does not love her was interrupted by the crackling of the skin and the feeling of a shock. Yanwu jumped through the window and grabbed the instrument with the words, "What does this mean?" The tool flew down. To say that Sun was scared is an understatement. After all, this is the end of her secret, which was already wrapped in a not-so-ugly cloth. So why was her burn different every time? What does she do? Solka said that she had no intention of deceiving him. On the contrary, she wanted to tell him the whole truth. But the prince interrupted her, saying that the truth is no longer important. He carefully looked at the girl and quietly asked if she had been mutilating herself for a long time. He could not believe that he did not know this while his beloved was in terrible agony, renewing the entire scar. He fell to his knees, hugged, kissed, and whispered that there was no forgiveness for his blindness. He promised that anyone who brought her to this decision would pay with his life. The girl cried from helplessness. The prince continued, "For her torment, he will tear everyone involved." Solka did not expect this. She was again in his arms as if behind a wall, protected. Taking the girl in his arms, he jumped into the wreath and carried her to the lawn. Both of them calmed down a little under the singing of night birds. Yanwu asked her not to be ashamed of her feelings, and if she needs to cry now, let her cry. After a little silence, Solka turned to him and said that she has the gift of healing. Her blood is healing, as in the legend of the Virgin. The prince was silent, and she continued that at first she was enough only to heal the animals, but with age grew the power to heal even this burn, without her will. Previously, she renewed it once every 3 to 6 places. Now she has to do it every month. The prince began to apologize for his blindness. He could not imagine that she felt such torment. He thought that he knew everything and that he had everything under control. What pain now stood in the abyss of his eyes. Sun liked the prince's words that he would kill all her offenders, although she asked him not to take his life for her. Surely she is vicious. But Yanwu said that not at all, they are vicious. To mock her like that, and she simply endured for a very long time. Their conversation was interrupted by a message. Finally, they brought in a star connoisseur, a seer. In the past, his prophecy had caused the prince to take his life in wars for decades. Now he was completely different, old and infirm. Gray strands of hair spread over his clothes. He kneeled helplessly before His Highness. Yanwu looked at him very carefully, but made him wait for their meeting. And the picture of the past flashed before the prince, when he had prophesied that he would be bloodthirsty. And instead of a meeting, he only sent unexpected guests. Even his brother, the emperor, sent fewer assassins than this connoisseur of the stars. Didugan babbled that it was for the good of the empire, but the prince interrupted him. He remembers that his calligraphy was similar to that of the old emperor. The old man froze in surprise. He listened carefully to what he was being ordered to do. To write a decree on behalf of the old emperor. The old man pretended not to understand what he was being ordered to do. Then he began to protest, because this is a crime. In addition, the prophecy says that the cursed ruler will bring only trouble to his people. But the prince asked if what is happening now in the country is different from the curse. Now the emperor rules, who only looks under skirts. He has no other business, and he has no business with what is happening in the country either. The old man heard that the empire was teeming with corrupt officials. The borders were in constant wars. There is no peace in the country, and there is no end in sight. And all this by the hands of a man who has never even dreamed of a curse. After a pause, he added that the curse would soon be lifted. While the prince was speaking, the old man listened with his head down. And when he heard that the curse would fall, he looked up in surprise. I didn't understand what the prince was talking about. The prince smiled and said that he had managed to get the heavenly maiden's support. So, when he really cares so much for his homeland and is loyal to the empire, he must fulfill his request. The work was not easy. It is very easy to write something on paper, but to write a decree that will change the course of history is extremely difficult. The girls were cleaning the rooms. They were surprised that the blanket presented by His Highness did not lose its color even after washing. Yanwu called again through the window. What scared the girls into hiccups? Sun said that her door is always open for him. He can come through it. The nanny went to set the table for dinner. Left alone, the prince took her hand and put on the bracelet. He remembered that her mother wore a similar one, so he wanted to please her. Something to remember. But Sun became a little sad. In fact, she was afraid of her mother, because she was reminded of her by this terrible burn that her mother had made. But she sincerely thanked for the gift and promised to wear it. And then she apologized. She didn't want to seem rude. The prince wanted to ease her pain, but it seems that these memories only poured salt into the wound. He stroked gently, licked his lips. Sun could not resist. She herself was madly drawn to the prince. Tape after tape were untied easily and quickly. She agreed to everything, just to be with him. The same words were swirling in the prince's thoughts. They surrendered to each other's caresses. Not even the clatter of dishes being placed on Eunjung's table stopped them in their rush of passion. At this moment, only he was important. All sounds and smells have disappeared. Even the heat of the sun's rays is unimportant. He, his touch, his smell, his grace and strength are the only important things. For the night, Sola asked to sleep with Eunjung, grabbed a pillow and settled down next to her. She should have asked her opinion. Does she think that Sun has fallen in love? And there were thousands of other questions that Sun couldn't answer. There were always some doubts. For example, does she believe that the prince destroyed her people? These doubts tormented her. The nanny recommended asking the prince directly. Solka was looking for confirmation of these words to decide to kill him. But Eunjung said that she would not be able to persuade herself to kill the prince because she had given him her heart. And it is better for her to tell him everything and ask for help. That girl was afraid to betray the emperor. He is a cruel person and will crush them like nasty cockroaches as soon as he learns about the betrayal. And even now he can eavesdrop on their rum from the palace. She should not have fallen in love with the prince. She caused even more trouble. The prince was hunting. Today it was a deer. His loyal friend and General Ion noted that the prince was very active today. Probably the curse was less of a concern for him at the moment. Yanwu thought so too, and he is grateful to Sun for that. Here John asked if he could ask His Highness a tactless question. He agreed with interest. The question was unexpected. Is there a possibility that the prince knew about the special abilities of concubine song? From the beginning? The prince stopped. Didn't even think about it. But he thought he knew everything. But it turned out that there are many surprises for him. Disassembling the deer, he led on. His goal was always to protect Solka from his brother's sticky hands. This was the only thing he was guided by, and he could not even imagine such a thing. 15 years before. Then he was brought to the settlement of Yule, told that the women there are often stolen. Therefore, the settlement is under the protection of the emperor. The prince was invited to visit the matriarch. As he passed by, he saw a woman comforting a girl named Solka, who had been insulted by someone again. The girl was persuaded not to cry. The prince saw a little sobbing girl. I heard that the nanny threatened to show the matriarch where the crayfish spend the winter, but the girl was persuaded not to go. The mother was not to blame for anything. It just caught my eye. And tears poured down her face in rivers, gathered on her chin and dripped onto her dress. Even then, this girl fell into his heart. Her sincere look, big kind eyes and efforts to protect those she loves. When he returned to the palace, his brother was running after him with words about the last of Yule. I asked what she is like. Is she really as beautiful as they say? Even at that moment, he decided that he would make her a concubine, although the prince hinted that he already had 5 concubines. But the brother did not listen. He wanted her to be in the harem. He has already issued the decree. Tomorrow the matriarch will receive a message. He desperately wanted to remain in history as a ruler who had a concubine from Yule. But if she refuses? The prince did not hold back. The brother said that refusing the imperial decree would doom her to death. You will have to kill her. And Yeonwoo will never forget that smile. Youngkem was proud of himself. It will be sad if their family ends with her, because they are the most beautiful creatures. Then he added that she would meet death only after giving birth to his child. Then there was a fire. The emperor was rescued and taken out of the flames. He, like a small child, did not want to go without his sword, which remained in the flame. Memories flooded the prince with new force. Memories that no one knew about. Solka's mother was the matriarch. The prince brought a scroll with an order to give son to the harem in honor of the young emperor's ascension to the throne. The prince talked about the insatiable lust of his brother emperor. He does not care much about the consent of the girls. And when he uses it, he throws them crippled into the street, or their corpses. The upset mother heard about the depravity of the emperor. The emperor promised to take his daughter away on her 15th birthday. The prince entrusted the secret to Mother Song. On his 10th birthday, the old emperor presented him with a tapestry depicting a legend. But she is full there, not like everyone knows. The tapestry shows that the emperor did everything to save her, to bring the celestial maiden back to life. The prince said that the maiden should have chosen the emperor from the beginning. He would make her happy no matter how she looked, because he loved her for her soul and not her beauty. Yeonwoo told the matriarch that if Solka would be a loving emperor from the legend, she would have to hold out for 10 years and wait for him. He promised to protect her, and for this he needs help. He said that the emperor would not be able to kill her if she was the only one with Yule. The matriarch asked if she correctly understood that her daughter, in order to have value for the emperor, must be the only one of the people and at the same time eternal, like the virgin from the legend. And according to legend, if the virgin stayed with the emperor, would he give her happiness? The prince agreed with every word. After thinking, the matriarch said that Yule's life is full of suffering, but she believes that he will keep his word and protect her daughter. She promised to leave her daughter in his hands. Tears came to my eyes. I did not expect that this is how their family should end. The prince asked only to fulfill his part of the agreement and leave the rest to him. And today the prince came to Solka's room and did not find her there. The nanny said that she had fallen asleep in her room. When something bothers the young lady, she sleeps in Eunjung's room. The prince asked what was bothering her. Eunjung said that Song had heard that it was the prince who destroyed her people. Yeonwoo wondered who was spreading such rumors. The nanny fell at his feet begging him, if there was no truth in these words, that he should speak to the young lady, to tell her. The stronger her heart yearns for him, the more she is tormented by doubts from these rumors. The prince promised to fulfill her request, only she had to get up immediately. It is not necessary for Solka to see her kneeling in front of him. Sola opened her eyes and saw Yeonwoo. But how did she end up in her room in his arms? Was she falling asleep in Eunjung's room? She thought that it was a dream and she was glad that he was nearby. And the prince said that he had brought her here, that she was sleeping as if she had been killed. But she usually hears every rustle. She probably didn't want to wake up in his arms. When the girl woke up, the prince said that he wanted to tell her about Yule's people and her mother. She was frightened but listened carefully. Yeonwoo told her everything that really happened, that all Yule have put their hands on themselves. He knew about everything, but it was for the sake of saving her life. Solka was indignant. I only asked if he imagined how it was, the last of his kind. At the yard, everyone turns away and mocks. Nothing amuses the emperor so much as the sight of her choking back tears. She burned her face to gain freedom. Now and in general, the dream of freedom is unattainable. She was offended by her mother that she had left her alone. Every time there were rumors about a new survivor, Yule, she would turn around with fear, as if it was the last day. It turns out that the prince gave only a respite until they find another Yule. But the prince said that there are no other Yules. Everyone who lived outside the village no longer walks on the land. He took care of that. That she remains the only one is up to him. Hyunwoo just wanted her to be safe, and Sola exploded. She screamed that he would not justify his actions by protecting her. She begged not to shed more blood for her sake. Countless people are already in the ground so that she could breathe. It hurt her unbearably. The death of her mother, whom Vana considered a traitor but in fact a defender, hurt. Every mutilated body of her people ached. My heart ached from love for the prince. Unbearable pain. Now at this moment, looking into the eyes of her beloved, she saw a murderer. She ordered, shouted, begged him to get away, a murderer. The emperor basked in the arms and caresses of one of the concubines, who told him everything that was happening in the palace. This whore from Yule shares a bed with my brother day and night? You vile scumbag. He just has to make her a baby. But because of this distorted face, it is disgusting to approach him. Having overcome himself, he called the eunuch and ordered to immediately bring the concubine's son. And the babysitter, too. Praising the emperor, Song prostrated himself. He felt perfect, his victim at his feet. He said he had a gift for her and went around from all sides. For a concubine, it is an honor when the emperor gives. She whispered without raising her head. The emperor came around from behind, quietly sat down and put a sword in her hand. This is a gift. And laughed wildly. Is the sword really incredible? It is sharpened especially for you. As always, his voice was snaking. Ta-sun froze, contemplating her reflection in the polished steel. He always hissed that he would teach his favorite concubine to use a blade. But looking at her reflection, she now dreamed only of putting this sword in his throat. The emperor gave her a secret task, but did not teach her how to hold a weapon. So now he will fix that. Teach her. Ordered to remember this lesson and use skills. He ordered the nanny to raise her head and the concubine to hold the blade firmly and stick it straight into her throat. The girls were barely alive from such pleasures of the emperor. Holding the girl's hands, he tried to slit the nanny's throat, but the resistance prevented him, and Eunjung reassured everyone that everything would be fine. But he still got his way. At the next attempt, he kissed the nanny on the face and blood flowed from the cut. What a shame for the emperor that she missed. Now he ordered to be more agile and aim more accurately. Solka threw away the knife and begged for mercy, promised that she would fulfill the order as soon as possible. She needed a little time. The emperor gave 15 days. And after 15 days he opens a big hunt. And will she guess who he will hunt? Laughing madly, the happy man read the order to himself. On the first day, something terrible will happen to the prince, because anything can happen on the hunt. But it is not so easy to defeat him. So it will be her honor to deliver the final blow to his powerful body. Or she could kill him now and run. There will be no chasing after her. Kill and run, kill and run. The words crept into my soul like black gloom. At home, she gave free rein to her emotions. She sobbed so that the trees swayed. Eunjung reassured it was only a scratch. But Solka was afraid that she would lose her and could not stop. The nanny took her face in her hands and told her to listen. If something happens to her, she must remember that she is innocent, and not to seek revenge. To live on, in happiness. But these words didn't calm the girl down. She cried even more. She didn't want a prince or anyone else. She just wanted a nanny to always be by her side. She promised that she would do everything as needed and they would leave the palace together. She decided to focus now on how to get them out of here alive. That night she had a dream in which she was really happy. Carefree. She ran across the field after a beautiful butterfly with golden wings. Looking around, she realized that the field was not made of flowers. It was made of butterflies, which rose in fright in the sky. She wanted to catch one and reached for it. She had almost reached it when she felt someone grab her dress and pull her back. The little girl laughed so cleanly and melodiously. She handed her a handful. She placed such a desired butterfly with golden wings in her palm. It was the happiest dream I had ever seen. Solka had breakfast without any appetite. The nanny tried to make her swallow something, and she suddenly wanted a pomegranate, but she would eat it willingly. I tried to show off, but it didn't work out. That spoonful of food that she swallowed because of the force immediately returned. Solka became pale and the urge to vomit did not stop. Here the nanny asked if there was nausea before, and did she bleed this month? The answer was obvious. The blood was delayed for 10 days, and the nausea happened even earlier. After a moment of silence, the nanny said that when the matriarch wore it under her heart, she also really wanted a pomegranate. This dream and that butterfly she was so happy about, is this a prophecy? It can't be. Yeonwoo looked through the window as usual. I asked for permission to enter, and in my hands was a note with grenades. Said it was hard to get. He traveled south to get a pomegranate for her. How did he know what she wanted? She threw the grenade, said to leave her. The prince did not listen. He persuaded her to treat him as she pleased because he was really guilty, but not to throw anything away, but to eat it. She has lost her blush, she must eat well. And over time she will stop being angry with him, he hopes for that. The empress's tea ceremony demanded that she not come empty-handed, so Song accepted the prince's gift. The empress was unwell, and ceremonies were infrequent. The empress was presented with a pomegranate. She was surprised, because it is a very expensive delicacy. The concubines immediately reported that it was from Sun, and how without poison on their part and denunciation. The empress asked if it was true that the prince was enveloping her in his love, and what would happen when she bore a child from him. Their conversation was interrupted by the visit of concubine Yu, who apologized that she could not bow because she was carrying the emperor's child. She was proud of her position. Talks about carrying a child boiled down to the fact that after giving birth, they would live as they wanted. This is their whole purpose. And what kind of mother can she see herself as? Concubine Yu replied that her work ends when the child is born. Do you need anything else? Some mothers sacrifice themselves for the sake of their child, answered Sun quietly, remembering her nanny. Ta Yu did not share her views. In the imperial palace, where deadly intrigues are being woven, he intends to survive. If it is necessary to sacrifice children for this, he will not hesitate. Laughing with Sun is their first priority. So looking into her past that her mother disfigured her face, she understands little about motherhood. Solka couldn't hold back and said that they were right. But this scar reminds her that her mother sacrificed her life for her life. And she is proud that her daughter. A new anxiety appeared. Trouble did not go alone. Now she has to worry about her child. Must give him life. He is afraid that he will not have time to leave these walls before his birth. She was worried about how long she would be able to keep the secret of her pregnancy. And at the same time she wondered who the baby would be, her or Yeonva. But the main thing is that the baby is alive and healthy. When Solka's mother handed her over to the prince, she thought only of her daughter's salvation, so that she would survive and be happy. And she did everything for it. Everything belongs to her, whatever it's worth. She sacrificed herself to save her flesh and blood. The only thing she wanted was for Sun to be happy, and she swore to be happy. Only now she understood her mother, her sacrifice. Only now. The nanny prepared a bath so that Solka could soak in the warm water and at least rest a little. Especially in her current state, stress was not good for her. Seeing the shadow, the girl turned around. Yeonwoo stood behind her, his clothes, face, hair all covered in blood. He could barely stand on his feet. The stench of blood was the only thing that gave him sleep when she was not around. She couldn't help but respond to the kiss, even though she was angry with him and still wanted him as much as he wanted her. She had to tell him something, but first she had to wash the blood off him. And while washing, she asked questions. Is Yeonwoo preparing a coup? He asked if his answer would affect anything. And the girl fell silent and thought, this chess was too difficult. The only way out that she sees is to run away together. Looking closely, he asked if she was ready for this for his sake. She was ready, if only away from it all, somewhere in a cozy place. The prince was ready to move mountains to protect her. But that's not all. He cannot let her escape. Begged to ask for anything, but not this. He cannot lose her. Solka asked not to touch her today, but she did not want him to go. The prince took her in his arms like a small child, hugged her to him. In that second, Yeonwoo swore to protect her from anyone at any cost. And she decided that if he did not leave, she would protect their child even at the cost of his life. The morning of the big hunt has come. The generals and their friends who were supposed to observe this majestic action were housed in the tents. By order of the emperor, Solka was supposed to be on the hunt. But only for her it was not a joyful event or entertainment at all. The day when she had to kill her lover in order to gain freedom for the nanny, for herself, and now also for the sprout that grows under the heart. She entered Yeonwoo's tent where the soldiers were conferring. If she had been a little braver and not so afraid of the emperor's revenge, and if she could have believed Yeonwoo a little more, maybe their fates would have been different. The prince was very happy with her visit. The generals bowed and tactfully left them alone. Although she was here by order of the emperor, he is infinitely glad that she is near. The emperor allowed her to be here solely because of the prince. How generous. He asked her to stay in his tent. She would be looked after. He gave her a fur coat so that she wouldn't get cold, because now she has to take care of more than herself. Last chance, she only has one chance to find out. She asked who she was for, and the question was stopped by the general, who reported on readiness for hunting. In the west, a pack of wolves was hunted, and the prince promised to catch a leader for her, so that his fur would warm her in the cold winter evenings. Sun did not want those generous gifts. Let him give them to the heavens. But over the years, Yanwu has already given a lot to the heavens. Now it's time for gifts to his beloved. He ordered not to touch the she-wolves with the cubs. I remembered how Solka once said that if you kill a bear, you should also kill a bear because it cannot survive without its mother. At that moment the girl's heart, which was tearing into pieces, could not stand it. With a scream, she rushed to Yanwu. She begged him to stop. "Don't go anywhere. I wanted to warn you." She said that she had a terrible dream in which he was driving to meet the dead. But Yanwu just admired how she worried about him. She was afraid and tried to convey her fear to him. Meanwhile, the clatter of hooves came closer and closer. The emperor rode majestically in white clothes on a white horse. Solka fell silent. Her heart was now so tight that she couldn't breathe. The last moments to heal grief are lost. The prince asked her to stay in the tent so that would not happen. Her health and life are the most valuable gift for him. With these words, he abruptly turned and left. Solka obeyed and did not go out. But she could not find a place for herself, and every second she looked to see if he was leaving. She begged the Buddha to return safe and sound. It happened! Terrible screaming and commotion from outside the tent. Fragments of words came out, then everything became clearer and finally very close. The prince was wounded. "Call the doctor, immediately." Seeing his wounds and almost lifeless body, horror enveloped the girl. He is the father of her child, her lover, and at the same time the key to freedom. Everyone was in a hurry. The general ordered to carry rags to stop the bleeding, to send for a doctor. Only Sun stood, numb with grief. There was still no doctor. Life was barely alive in the powerful body of the prince. The wound was fatal. General Yan found out that there would be no doctor. Solka quietly approached and asked the general to leave the tent altogether. She will try to help the prince. The general looked intently at her and silently nodded his head, then loudly gave the order to leave the tent, and they were left alone. The girl stood over the motionless body of the prince and whispered to herself that this was her chance. Right now she can free herself, forever leave the palace and the pain that was around her all the time. Moment. The bloody point of the sword falls to the ground. A resounding bell rings out in complete silence. An incredible scream throughout the state of the tents. The news that His Highness was killed instantly spread from mouth to mouth. He was killed by concubine's son. It was heard from afar, and the concubine at that moment was running with all her legs as far as possible from the center of events. She killed the prince and ran away. Catch her. These and other phrases barely reached her ears. Tears streamed down her face either from fear or from happiness. She did not run away alone, but as she had planned, with a nanny. They ran as fast as they could, between trees and meadows, occasionally looking around to see if the emperor's guard would pounce on them. General John was riding ahead of the wind when he saw that something was wrong with the wolves they were hunting. He managed this time and the wolf was killed. But for some reason they attacked only His Highness and did not notice anyone else. The general said that he had once seen a wolf behave in the same way. It was controlled by a shaman. The prince saw another comrade behind him, took out his sword and quietly told him to leave. A huge wolf was walking straight at him. The last words of the prince, his last order to General Yan, was to protect the concubine song until the end. With these words he rushed towards the wild-eyed beast, but the battle was uneven. The emperor stood over the body of his dead brother. He tried to look sad. He muttered that this was a huge loss for him, and an incalculable loss for the empire, as he was the greatest commander. But when no one was watching, he was happy. Finally, no one will prevent him from ruling as he wants. He is king and god in his empire. But now, in front of the people, he had to play the role of a sad emperor and a grieving brother. Notified everyone that the prince is dead. He said that he would give him all his clothes as a gift. He would serve him as a shroud, and he would announce mourning in the empire. and so majestically he unleashed his speeches. He reported that his people were following the trail of the murderers and their supporters, and very soon the murderers of his beloved brother would be punished. There is no other punishment than death. He prayed over the body and promised to cut into thousands of pieces his killers and all those involved, even tried to squeeze out a tear. His pathetic speeches were interrupted by a servant, who reported that the great oracle and the 3 most respected ministers were coming here, followed by the judges. Hearing this news, he was perplexed, began to shout at subordinates who mourned the prince, ordered them to stop sobbing. Shut up immediately. The procession approached the emperor. A seer walked in front, followed by a scroll on a tray. Approaching, they loudly announced that they had arrived with the last testament of the old emperor, and unfolding the scroll, they began to read. And he read to the judges present, so that there would be no doubt, the last will of the emperor. After my death, my eldest son will rule. As soon as he returns from the war, he will ascend the throne. People began to whisper, to look at the emperor with distrust. At first frightened by the news, now the emperor felt like God. After all, his older brother is dead, and therefore, he is the only legitimate emperor. But no one expected such a surprise. At the words, "The elder prince lies a cold corpse," the prince hanged himself. He took off his shroud and asked his brother if he was sure. Yanwu stood up. "I, brother, am more alive than all the living." It was as if he had not been lying on the verge of death an hour ago, bleeding. No one understood this miracle, whether it was a ghost. When Solka was left alone with the prince, there was barely any life in his mighty body. Her thoughts fought with each other. Her will fought with love. But the sword already entered for liberation did not achieve its goal. He landed on her hand, cutting it. She begged him to drink the blood that heals like life itself, but he was too weak. No matter how much she begged him to open his eyes, no matter how much she asked him to drink and live, his pulse became rarer and weaker. Solka did not give up. She could not let him die. She loved him more than anything. She began to suck her blood. Having collected a lot of healing liquid, she poured it into the mouth of her beloved. She repeated it again and again, pouring life into it, and she did not stop praying. And finally he moved. There was no happier moment in her life than this. He will live. Praise the heavens, her lover will live. Solka whispers that her emperor is already quartering her, so she will run as fast as she can. With the words of a request to forget her and find his happiness, she jumped out of the tent. He had already heard her words. The emperor began to stammer. "This is impossible, this does not happen." Yanwu asked to read the will again, so that there are no doubts. And with words of honor and exaltation to the legitimate emperor, the nobles handed the scroll to Yanwu. As the emperor rehearsed unhappily. After all, he was generous to them. This is all false. The scroll is a fake. Treason. Grab it now. I am legitimately crowned. And he shouted many other phrases, but it was all useless. No one listened to him. Here he mentioned the prophecy. After all, it was not for nothing that the prince was suffering from bloodlust for decades. He is cursed. If he ascends the throne, famine and war await everyone. But the prophet interrupted his fiery speech. After all, the curse fell. Prince Yanwu won the love of the celestial maiden. The cursed star no longer affects his fate. These words stunned the emperor. Heavenly maiden, a maiden from Yule, concubine dream. Wild laughter tore through him. He turned to the prince and poured so much poison into the words, "Dear brother." But she is dead. Everyone was overwhelmed by this news. They were worried whether the curse would return because of the death of the virgin. The prince approached the emperor, drew his sword and said that this was the only way they would solve it. He waved and cut open his brother's face. Although he was the killer of his beloved woman, he was still a brother. That is why the prince decided to give him a quick death. The prophet was ordered to prepare the funeral, and he himself went to catch up with the fleeing emperor. No matter how hard the emperor tried to escape, Yanwa, a hunter who had devoted a decade to hunting, followed a bloody trail. He screamed, hissed, wheezed. The last drops of poison and bile poured from his mouth. It stank of fear and death. Spikes did not approach until he tripped and fell down the hill. He remembered that they are brothers and he will not be able to do that with him. And that it was not true. His father held his hand and said that he would rule. It was before death. Yanwu agreed. And he told about the forgery of the will, but it was no longer of any importance. The emperor did not believe, even with his virtuoso meanness. He did not do such a thing. The prince added that he had something for the emperor, something interesting that he had not taken into account. When the shaman misleads the beast, he teaches him to distinguish the face of the enemy. And they are twins. The tyranny of the emperor is over. Many people will breathe a sigh of relief. The end of the reign of a bloodthirsty pervert. Yanwu could only now turn to his beloved. He looked up at the sky, hoping she could hear him. Did he still lose her? Didn't save? And the child? 6 months later. Solka was sitting on a large lawn. She no longer had burned scars. Her body was healed, but her soul was aching. Eun-young looked after her. She was waiting for the butterflies again. That's what she told the nanny every time. But the nanny understood that she looked like a prince, and he hopes that one day he will find her. Looking into the distance, drowning in this multitude of flowers, the girls were always surprised and could not believe what they had succeeded in. They ran away. Solka mentioned General John. If it weren't for him, they wouldn't have survived. The emperor sent his hounds on their trail. He made it just in time. They were unharmed. His arrow hit the target. No one chased them anymore. Solka then told the general that she had done everything she could. He was grateful, and said that Yanwu predicted that she would save him because he ordered him to protect her. Then Sun asked him not to follow them anymore, at which point their paths were to part. She just wanted a quiet life away from everyone. Of course Solka missed her beloved, but she is the concubine of the previous emperor. She had no rights. The prince must forget her and live on. The girls had already gotten up to go home. Sun struggled to get up, pregnancy already made her not so fragile. But looking into the distance, she froze. Before her was a lover. He was surrounded by his loyal comrades, warriors, generals. He held a butterfly in his hand. The same from her dream, golden. The bouquet of flowers that she had collected fell from her hands. Her strength left her and she could not even hold the flower. He apologized for not coming for so long, but he had to make sure that nothing was in danger for her when she flooded the palace. He looked so warmly and tenderly, examined every centimeter of her face. She changed. She shone like the sun. Your Majesty. And Yanwu gently said that she will soon become an empress, but according to the law she has no right to do so. She is unworthy. After all, she was a concubine. And also, but Yanhua interrupted, agreeing that she was to kill him by order of the emperor. The news that the prince knew this all along stunned the girl. Of course he knew, but he was waiting for her to make her personal choice. And if she had decided to kill him, he would have gladly died at the hands of his beloved. After all, he brought so much grief into her life, so many deaths, that he was ready to wash away this sin before her with his blood. But fortunately, she made her choice. He knelt before her and asked her to be by his side when he ascended the throne. This is only her place. The prince fell to his stomach. There was so much happiness in him now. He listened to his child moving there, the highest gift of fate. Solka said that this is the same field that she saw in her dream where there were so many butterflies. He agreed that their firstborn should be born here, and the other children should be born in the palace. He asked me not to stay in the sun for a long time so that it does not burn. So much tenderness and love, could she have hoped for it? But the sun doesn't burn her anymore. It doesn't hurt anymore. Nothing hurts, nothing hurts. If only he was around. I waited for him for so long. Finally, she was able to hug him whole and unharmed. 7 years later, the nanny was already looking after the emperor's child. The firstborn of their majesties was appointed as the successor princess. Eun-young was enveloped in Sola's father's attention. He persuaded her to be his wife. But the nanny said that they will not have children. It turned out that this is not an obstacle to being together. Another unexpected news shocked Mr. Song. The nanny was also from the Yule family. They guarded this secret so much that they were able to carry it through the years. But that didn't get in the way either. Their conversation was interrupted by the procession of the imperial family. The empress was always close to her husband. The princess was sitting in front. The young princess imitated her mother's beauty. Like all the maidens of the Yule family, she was beautiful, but she inherited her formidable character from her father. She will be a fair ruler. His Majesty gave up the right to take concubines so that they would give birth to a prince. For him there was only one woman in the world, his heavenly virgin. Hoyan became the chief eunuch of the country. His brother Yeon, a general, Yanwu's constant companion, serves as his right-hand man and a great commander. Solka is now the happiest wife and mother. The smile no longer leaves her face, and she cried all her tears to the last drop a long time ago. So much pain, fear, blood was experienced. Now there is only love and happiness ahead and butterflies.